Takumi finds himself transported to another world, standing before the goddess Nolan. The first thing she does is offer a heartfelt apology, explaining that his summoning was a complete mistake. She reveals that when a summoning spell is cast, it typically targets a random group of Earth's losers to transport them to another world. However, Takumi's life was actually going quite well, so he wasn't supposed to be included. Unfortunately, due to a mishap, he was swept up in the summoning process along with everyone else. The blame falls on the Holy Sidonia Empire, which recklessly activated the summoning spell. Since Takumi wasn't intended to be summoned, Nolan brought him directly to her instead of sending him to Sidonia with the other summoned heroes. Takumi asks Nolan if she can simply send him back to Earth, given that his summoning was a mistake. Unfortunately, she explains that it's not possible. Out of sheer anger at Sidonia for using the forbidden summoning spell, she immediately removed it from this world's magical laws, ensuring that no one could travel between worlds anymore. As a result, Takumi is now permanently stuck here. To make matters worse, the summoning process technically killed him. When Takumi realizes he's now a disembodied ghost, he begins to panic, but Nolan reassures him that there's no need to worry. While she can't return him to Earth, she can provide him with a new body and help him start a new life as a citizen of this world. As an apology, since this is partially her fault, she offers to grant him her blessing to make his life easier. Takumi doesn't really have much of a choice, so he agrees to be reborn into this world. Nolan is glad to hear that because it makes this a lot easier for her. She tells him to open his status screen to check out the new life he will have. When Takumi does, he finds out that Nolan is planning to give him a 17-year-old body, even though he's 40. Nolan tells him not to bother with the minor details. More importantly, he still needs to pick out his job. She tells him that there are two main classes for jobs. If Takumi wants something more combat focused, he can pick things like swordsman, knight, or hunter. But if that doesn't appeal to him, he could always pick one of the production jobs instead. Takumi isn't too keen on the idea of fighting, so he opts for a production-focused job instead. Nolan proceeds to embed the job into his soul, along with several extra blessings, before sending him on his way, completely forgetting to provide any sort of tutorial. Takumi crash lands in the middle of a forest, and after managing to get back on his feet, he catches his reflection in a nearby river. It's then he realizes he's truly become a different person, and to his amazement, his arthritis is gone. Deciding to make the most of his new situation, he checks the bag Nolan left with him to see what he's been given. Inside, he finds some food rations and money, which means he doesn't need to worry about starving for the time being. Takumi checks his status screen and sees that Nolan really went all out, granting him an impressive array of useful skills. Among them, he notices elemental magic, so he decides to test it out. Holding out his hand, he calls out "water ball," and instantly, a sphere of water forms in his palm. The other elements work just as seamlessly, and Takumi is able to use them effortlessly on his first attempt. With his newfound magic abilities figured out, he begins to consider his next steps and decides to make his way to the nearest village. While walking, Takumi comes across a stick in the middle of the path. It looks like a really nice stick, so he uses his appraisal skill to scan it and finds out that this is Trent wood. It's gotten from a wood monster and is really useful for making things like magic staves and spears. Takumi decides to put his modeling skill to the test and uses it on the wood to create a spear. Since the wood works so well, Takumi decides to scan around to see if there are any other useful plants nearby. He finds a ton of them, so he spends the next hour picking them. However, he doesn't know what to do with all these plants since they definitely won't fit in his bag. He might have to leave them behind. But then Takumi remembers that he has an item box skill, so he uses it to store all the plants. Suddenly, Takumi hears a scream nearby. Moments later, a little girl bursts out of the bushes and runs straight to him, pleading for help because a monster is chasing her. When Takumi turns to see the creature, he's faced with a massive, horned rabbit. The rabbit charges at him with incredible speed, nearly impaling him, but at the last moment, Takumi panics and accidentally stabs the rabbit in the head, killing it instantly. He's stunned that a beginner like him managed to defeat such a creature, and assumes it must be thanks to Lady Nolan's blessing. In reality, the goddess had nothing to do with it. It was pure dumb luck. After his fight, Takumi is granted the job title of warrior, much to his dismay, as he had hoped to avoid combat entirely. However, he sets that aside for now and checks to see if the little girl is unharmed. She introduces herself as Molly and assures him she's fine, explaining that she was out gathering herbs but wandered too far from Board Village and ended up getting attacked. When Molly mentions a village, Takumi gets excited and asks if he can go there. Molly agrees to guide him, but first points out that the rabbit's meat is delicious and asks if he's planning to take it with him. Realizing it would be a waste to leave it behind, Takumi stuffs the rabbit into his item box. Only then does it hit him that he just revealed his item box skill in front of Molly, even though he intended to keep it a secret. Resigned to his slip-up, Takumi follows Molly as they begin their journey to the village. At the same time, the other people who got summoned have just arrived in the Empire of Sidonia, and they are incredibly confused about what's going on. None of them are hurt, but they have no idea where they are. All of a sudden, they hear someone call out to them as heroes. A woman approaches and tells them that they are no longer in their original world and that they have been summoned to use their power as heroes to save this world. She introduces herself to them as the Empress of the Sidonia Empire, Elizabeth, and one look at her face makes the kids realize that she's shady as hell. Just then, Akane's unique skill kicks in, and it seems Nolan granted her the blessing of revelation. If she follows her gut instinct, she will naturally arrive at the right answer. And right now, Akane's gut is telling her that Elizabeth is a traitor, so she can't be trusted. By the time Takumi arrives in Board Village, Molly's parents come out to greet him and thank him for rescuing their daughter. Molly's father introduces himself as Banga, while her mother is Martha. They express their admiration for Takumi, assuming he must be a very responsible person to have traveled such a long distance on his own. Takumi takes the opportunity to ask if it would be possible for him to stay in the village for a while, explaining that he has nowhere else to go. Banga and Martha warmly welcome him, but mention that, unfortunately, there isn't an inn in the village, so there's currently no place for him to stay. However, they suggest a solution. The villagers can build him a house. Soon, the entire village gathers around an empty plot of land, ready to get started. Wanting to contribute in some way, Takumi decides to use his earth magic to flatten the ground for the foundation. It's the first time he's used magic on such a large scale, and the effort nearly causes him to pass out from mana depletion. The villagers are all amazed that Takumi can use earth magic so easily. Takumi asks if they think he just did something strange, but they tell him not to worry about it, since he has taken care of the foundation. The rest of them get to work assembling his house for him. By the next morning, Takumi's house is completed. Thanks to his carpentry, blacksmithing, and sewing skills, Takumi is able to make a good set of furniture for himself. But there's something else he's been meaning to try out. He got a bunch of ores from the village blacksmith, Boron, and he wants to try using alchemy to extract the metal. Takumi finds himself with iron ore, silver ore, copper ore, and even some magic iron ore. Starting with the iron, he decides to try making an iron ingot. Normally, this process would require a large furnace and several hours of labor, but thanks to his alchemy skill, he's able to do it instantly. However, the process consumes a significant amount of his mana. His first attempt at ore extraction is a success, and Takumi is thrilled with the result. Excited by the possibilities, he resolves to extract as much as he can so he'll have plenty of materials to work with later. After a few hours, Molly stops by Takumi's house to bring him some dinner. When she opens the door, she's horrified to find him collapsed on the floor, looking completely drained. It turns out Takumi had pushed himself too hard with the ore extraction and came dangerously close to dying from mana depletion. Luckily, Martha and Banga gave him a recovery potion, bringing him back to normal. While Takumi is eager to continue practicing his alchemy, he had to promise them he wouldn't overdo it again. Over time, Takumi extracts a bunch of iron, copper, and even a bit of gold, allowing him to make a ton of useful tools. Once he is done with his alchemy practice, he spends time with Boron in the forge, learning how to make all kinds of weapons. The blade he forges turns out really well, and once Boron is done making the sheath, it will be complete. Takumi's blacksmithing skill is now at level 40, so he he's done practicing that for now and decides to move on to something else. Takumi approaches Banga and asks if he can borrow a couple of potions. Banga agrees without hesitation, but he mentions that the potions he has are basic and might not be very useful. Takumi assures him that's fine, explaining that he just needs an example to use as a template. He plans to create his own potions using the herbs he collected from the forest. Impressed by Takumi's initiative, Banga offers his full support and even says he'll buy some potions from him once the first batch is ready. Takumi thanks Banga and, with the basic potion in hand, begins crafting his own version. He uses hilcock leaves and water to create it, carefully following his process. Once finished, he pours the potion into a glass jar and compares it to the one Banga provided. Both are blue, but the potion Takumi made is noticeably more vibrant and appears to contain traces of magic. Despite the promising appearance, Takumi isn't sure if it's a success. He knows he needs to test it to confirm it's safe, but the thought of potentially poisoning himself makes him hesitant to take the risk. To build up some poison tolerance, he decides to eat whatever questionable items he can find until he's about to die, and then use healing magic to cure himself. After a couple of hours of this self-destructive experiment, he feels absolutely terrible. On the bright side, curing himself so much has granted him the purification skill, which will definitely come in handy at some point. As Takumi is getting back to his feet, he hears a noise behind him and finds a massive boar staring him down. The boar is clearly hostile, so Takumi readies his spear to defend himself. However, as the boar charges, the spear breaks on impact, leaving the boar unscathed and Takumi defenseless. Desperate, he uses every type of magic at his disposal, but nothing seems to harm the boar. As if things couldn't get any worse, he catches sight of a poison spider creeping up behind him, poised to strike. Takumi realizes he's completely cornered. Instead of attacking Takumi, the spider turns its attention to the boar, throwing off its charge and causing it to miss him. However, the boar isn't backing down and continues its assault, leaving Takumi with little time to react. So far, none of his physical attacks have worked, but there's still one tactic he hasn't tried. As the boar charges at him again, Takumi leaps into the air and, at the moment of impact, uses his alchemy skill on the boar's head to break it down. His quick thinking pays off, allowing him to survive the encounter. Now that he's safe, Takumi decides to check on the spider since it helped him out earlier. The spider is in really poor shape after being hit by the boar. Takumi decides to heal it so it doesn't die. Afterwards, he gets up to return to the village, but then he receives a notification telling him that he has successfully tamed the spider. He didn't realize it was even possible to tame a spider, but he's hesitant to take it with him since spiders are considered dangerous monsters. The spider gives Takumi an adorable look with its cutesy eyes, and despite everything, he decides to accept it as his pet. To make it official, he names her Maple. Not long after, Takumi returns to the village, proudly showing off the massive boar he managed to kill. The villagers are impressed by his feat, but their amazement grows even more when they see the poisonous spider he's tamed. No one has ever accomplished such a thing before, leaving them in awe of Takumi's abilities. Putting that aside, Takumi suggests that the villagers share the boar since there's no way he can finish it on his own. That evening, the village throws a grand feast in his honor. While everyone else is enjoying the festivities, Banga approaches Takumi with the valuable leftovers from the boar and advises him to sell them in the nearest city, Bolton. With that, Takumi decides that Bolton will be his next destination. Meanwhile, Goddess Nolan has been keeping an eye on Takumi and is delighted by how well he's doing. One of her fellow goddesses questions her intentions, asking what she hopes to accomplish by giving Takumi such extraordinary treatment. After all, she provided him with a special body, a unique blessing, and even sent him back an entire year before Sidonia activated the summoning spell. Nolan, however, simply replies that she doesn't have any specific motive. She's just following what she believes to be the right thing to do. The next morning, Takumi wakes up to discover he's tied up in bed, instantly realizing that Maple is the one responsible. Maple apologizes, explaining that she has been feeling really lonely because Takumi has been so busy lately, and she just wanted to grab his attention. Takumi reflects and understands that he has been so caught up in his work that he hasn't been spending much time with Maple. Determined to make it up to her, he decides to take the day off from work and spend time playing with Maple, which makes her incredibly happy. Just then, Martha walks in to bring Takumi some lunch. It looks like something weird is going on between Takumi and Maple, but Takumi assures her that it's not what she thinks. Martha takes his word for it, but she can't help but notice that the silk Maple produced looks really nice. She plans to milk Maple dry of as much silk as she can. Later that day, Martha manages to craft a shirt made from spider silk, and all the women in the village are completely enamored with the texture of the fabric. Takumi is surprised to learn that spider silk is in such high demand. The women explain that spider silk is considered a luxury material, usually only affordable to nobles. Martha then asks Maple if she could produce more silk for her. Maple begins squirting it out, but the process is slow and time-consuming, meaning she won't have the chance to play with Takumi for a while. Takumi is a little disappointed since he was looking forward to spending time with Maple for once, but he still has things to do anyway, so he's not too bothered. It has been roughly a month since Takumi first came to this village, and he intends to head to the city and study his alchemy. However, he can't bring himself to say goodbye to all the villagers after spending so much time with them. Takumi heads over to the forge to meet with Boron and continue honing his blacksmithing skills. Before long, they successfully craft a chest plate that fits Takumi perfectly, along with a pair of steel toe boots. Boron mentions that the boots could come in handy if Takumi ever needs to kick something, but Takumi quickly clarifies that he has no intention of fighting, as his true focus is on becoming an alchemist. Just then, Banga shows up, and he's glad to see that Takumi's armor is finally complete. However, he admits he's going to miss Takumi once he's gone. He knows Takumi can't stay here forever if he wants to expand his production business. It's the logical move for him to head to the city, where he can sell more goods and get a reliable supply of materials. A trader from Bolton is going to come to the village in a couple of days, so Banga arranged for Takumi to ride with him on his way back to Bolton. Though they're sad to see him leave, they understand it's for the best and encourage Takumi to start getting his things ready. Grateful for all their support, Takumi thanks them and begins heading back to his house to pack up. On the way, he crosses paths with Martha, who is carrying a bucket of meat. Curious, he asks what she's up to, and Martha explains that she's on her way to dispose of the innards of a horned rabbit that Banga caught. She mentions that while the innards are considered the tastiest part of the rabbit, they require careful processing to eliminate any diseases or parasites. This village doesn't have the equipment necessary to do that, so she has to throw the meat away so no one gets sick. However, Takumi tells her that won't be necessary since he can just purify the meat. He bends down and uses purification magic, so the meat in the bucket should be safe to eat now. While Martha is indeed thankful, she is equally stunned that Takumi can use light magic. She tells him that he probably shouldn't reveal he can use light magic when he leaves this village because very few people in this world are capable of it. If people found out, it would draw a lot of unwanted attention. Takumi takes her warning to heart and vows to be cautious about revealing his powers. However, while he remains in the village, he decides to use his abilities to improve their quality of life as much as possible. Using earth magic, he constructs a sturdy brick wall to enhance the village's security. For added convenience, he installs a water pump and creates a few other useful amenities. By the time he finishes, the village has been completely transformed, looking like an entirely new place. When the merchant arrives, he barely recognizes it. Banga comes out to greet Papek, and after completing a trade deal, Takumi walks up so they can start going. Papek has already heard a lot about Takumi from Banga, so he introduces himself, and everyone asks if Takumi has all his stuff ready. Takumi assures them he hasn't forgotten anything, but there is one thing he wants to give them. He takes a potion from his bag and hands it to Banga, mentioning that he already left around 100 of these bottles at Banga's house, in case of any emergencies. He wants Banga to use them to heal injuries. Papek, stunned by the quality of the potion, asks if he can take a closer look. Upon examining it, he confirms that it's a high-level potion. The rest of the villagers soon show up to bid Takumi farewell. Papek says he will wait for them to finish their goodbyes before he leaves. Molly says goodbye to Maple, who's sleeping in Takumi's sack, and Martha hands him an outfit she and the other ladies made for him out of Maple's silk. Takumi is really grateful for their thoughtful gift and thanks everyone once more for being so kind to him, even though they haven't known him long. He He climbs into the carriage, and the villagers give him a warm and heartfelt send-off, assuring him that he will always have a place in their village. As Papek and Takumi set out for Bolton, Papek comments on how much the villagers clearly adore him. Even the others in the carriage can sense that Takumi was like family to the villagers, and the emotional farewell deeply touches Heath's heart. By the way, the group, also heading to Bolton, introduces themselves. The blonde guy introduces himself as Heath. The redhead is Real, and the gloomy-looking guy over there is named Bogger. They are part of a C-rank party called Lion Fang and are serving as Papek's bodyguards. However, the region is quite peaceful, leaving them with little to do. Real notices Takumi clutching his bag tightly and asks if he's carrying something valuable inside. Takumi responds, explaining that his pet killer spider is sleeping inside. The group is shocked that Takumi managed to tame such a dangerous creature. Real, however, insists on seeing the spider but comes across as overly creepy about it. Maple responds by headbutting him right in the face. Takumi immediately begins apologizing for Maple's actions, but the others reassure him there's no need, as Real completely deserved it. In fact, Heath jokes that after meeting Real, Maple might end up fearing all humans from now on. However, that doesn't seem to be the case since she seems to have taken a liking to Bogger. While everyone starts fawning over Maple, Papek calls Takumi to the front because he wants to talk about the potion he saw Takumi holding earlier. He asks if there are any more of those in stock because, if so, he would love to buy some. Takumi doesn't really mind selling Papek the potions, but all of a sudden, his horse stops, and it looks like there's trouble ahead. There is a horde of goblins surrounding the carriage for an attack, which is really bad news. The group seems eager that they finally have a chance to take action. They tell Takumi and Papek to relax and leave everything to them as they step onto the field. With about 20 goblins scattered across the area, they're confident in their abilities and dive into the fight. Real takes down the goblins from a distance with his bow, while Bogger and Heath handle the rest up close with their mace and axe. It doesn't take long before they've wiped out all the goblins. Afterward, they get to work dissecting the creatures to retrieve the magic stones. Soon after, everyone returns to the carriage, and their journey continues for 3 days until they reach Bolton. Upon entering the city, the Lion Fang members head to the Adventurers Guild to report the success of their bodyguard mission. Takumi accompanies them, as he also needs to register with the guild to remain in the city. Takumi would have preferred to join the Alchemist Guild, but since there isn't one in the area, he's left with no choice but to register as an adventurer instead. Hans, the receptionist, explains that Takumi can use the Adventurer Guild card as a form of identification, and as long as he completes at least one simple quest per month, the card will remain active. Takumi proceeds to register as an adventurer and introduces Maple as his pet. After all the registrations are complete, Takumi heads to Papek's trading company to work on a deal for the potions. He has roughly 100 of 3 different potions in stock, and all of them are extremely high quality. Papek is prepared to pay 10 silver coins for each healing and stamina potion and 50 silver coins for each mana potion. Takumi does some quick math in his head and realizes that he would make over 7 million yen. Takumi feels that the amount of money mentioned is far too much, but Papek explains that he could have earned even more if he already had an established reputation as a producer. With that in mind, since Takumi plans to work as a producer in the city, Papek suggests finding a house with an attached workshop for convenience. However, this makes Takumi realize that he hadn't even considered where he would live once he arrived in the city. Papek decides to help him out a little and calls for his assistant, Thomas, so he can show Takumi a good property with an affordable rate. However, when Takumi finally sees the house, it looks way more like a mansion, so he doesn't think he can afford it. Thomas assures him that the mansion is quite affordable and guarantees that there are no ghosts here, so he won't have to worry about that. Takumi spots the workshop connected to the house and starts thinking seriously about purchasing it, as it would be ideal for his work. With the money he made from selling potions to Papek, he has enough to afford it. After considering it for a while, he decides to move forward and tells Thomas that he'll buy the mansion. Thomas is glad to hear that and says he will get started on the paperwork immediately so Takumi can move in tomorrow if he wants. As they're walking through the city streets, Takumi smells something foul in the air. Thomas can tell that the smell is bothering Takumi, so he explains that the foul stench is coming from the sewers. Wealthy individuals use magical purifiers to cleanse their sewage, but the main city sewers lack such a luxury. Magical purifiers are incredibly rare, as they can only be discovered in ancient ruins or dungeons, making them far too costly to install in the city's sewer system, while priests are occasionally hired to manually purify the sewers using magic. The sewers remain filthy for the majority of the time. The next day, Takumi and Maple move into their new house, and the first thing Takumi wants to do is find a solution to the sewer problem. He gets a piece of quartz and clay from Papek's company, and after using magic to shape it, he combines fire magic with space-time magic to bake it quickly. After doing that for a while, Takumi's mana is completely drained, so he has to drink a couple of mana potions. On the bright side, he does manage to complete his creation, a modern toilet. At that moment, Takumi hears Papek shouting from the living room. He hurries over to see what's happening and finds Papek completely wrapped in Maple's silk from head to toe. Confused, Takumi asks Maple why she would do such a thing, and she explains that she thought Papek would find it amusing. To her credit, the soft and soothing texture of her silk does put Papek to sleep, but that doesn't make it acceptable. Takumi apologizes sincerely for Maple's behavior. Papek assures him it's fine, though being suddenly tied up like that did startle him a bit, so he excuses himself to quickly use Takumi's restroom. However, as soon as he enters, he comes back out and starts asking what this marvel of technology is. Takumi comes over and explains that it's a toilet attached to a magical purification device, so it automatically cleans itself once you're done with your business. Basically, after you take a dump, it uses purification magic to break down waste into inorganic materials, which then get flushed down the drain. The setup makes perfect sense to Papek, but he points out that the only way such a thing could have been created is by someone with an aptitude for light magic. This makes Takumi realize he may have slipped up, as Martha had explicitly warned him against openly using his light magic. Worried, he asks Papek to keep this a secret. Understanding Takumi's concerns, Papek agrees not to tell anyone. However, he's so impressed that he insists on having some of these toilets and asks Takumi if he could make 100 of them. Takumi is hesitant to agree, as making just one toilet was a lot of work. But since Papek is so insistent, he agrees to do it as long as Papek can provide the raw materials. Papek is really happy to hear that, but he can't expect Takumi to make all those toilets by himself. So, he suggests that Takumi should make a slave contract. Takumi is startled by the suggestion, as he would never consider owning a slave. Papek explains that if Takumi wants to keep his abilities hidden, having a slave to assist him might be the safest option, as slaves are bound to secrecy. He emphasizes that possessing an aptitude for light magic is an extraordinary rarity, signifying divine favor, which would likely draw the attention of the Church of Divine Light. The church might go to great lengths to force Takumi into working for them, making secrecy even more critical. The church makes a lot of profit by monopolizing purification magic, so Papek doubts they would be happy to learn that commoners could have access to cheap purification through Takumi's toilets. However, Papek has an idea of how to get around the church, so Takumi doesn't need to worry about it for now. The most important thing is making sure the church doesn't find out about his light magic. That's why Papek insists that getting a slave would be the best option for him. Takumi remains strongly opposed to slavery and declares that he will manage all the work on his own. However, his guild card suddenly begins to glow. Upon checking it, he discovers a message requiring him to complete a verification quest to maintain his adventurer status. Realizing he won't have the time to finish the toilets on his own, he reluctantly agrees to buy a slave. Papek brings Takumi to the Mulan Trading Company, explaining that they are known as the most ethical slave traders in the area. While Papek goes to negotiate with the owner to secure a good deal for Takumi, Takumi wanders out into the garden, drawn by its beauty. In the garden, he spots a stunning elf girl sitting on a terrace. The moment she notices Takumi, she immediately tells him to leave. A short while later, Papik introduces Takumi to Mulan, the owner of the slave trading company. He informs her that Takumi is interested in purchasing a slave, although he points out that Takumi was quite hesitant about the idea. Curious, Mulan asks Takumi if there's a particular reason for his reluctance. Takumi then explains that in his homeland, the practice of buying and selling people was abolished long ago, making it difficult for him to come to terms with it here. Mulan acknowledges Takumi's concerns, but reassures him that, in this nation, the rights and privileges of slaves are at least maintained to a certain degree. Here's how it essentially works. The owner is responsible for providing the slave with essential needs like food, clothing, and shelter, while the slave is expected to fulfill specific duties outlined in their contract. The contract also includes a clause preventing either the master or the slave from causing lethal harm to the other. Takumi finds this arrangement reassuring, as it essentially turns the slave contract into something resembling a regular job with clearly defined rules. Mulan goes on to explain the different types of slave contracts. For instance, those who become slaves due to debt are contracted until they earn enough to repay what they owe. Permanent contracts, on the other hand, are typically assigned to criminals or war captives as an alternative to execution. However, most slave contracts result from people being illegally forced into slavery by bandits. Papik suggests that a war slave would be the best choice for Takumi since they cannot leave their master without permission. While Mulan can arrange this, she asks why it's so important for the slave to be bound in such a way. Papik starts explaining Takumi's exceptional production skills and the need to protect his secrets, but Mulan insists on hearing the reasoning directly from Takumi. Takumi clarifies that, as a producer, he wants to focus on his work, but managing quests from the Adventurers Guild makes that difficult. Living in a mansion, he also needs help with its upkeep. Moreover, due to certain unique skills he has, he needs assurance that his slave won't disclose any information about him. Lastly, because his quests involve harvesting ingredients and could be dangerous, he requires a slave who is also a skilled fighter to ensure their safety. Mulan quickly understands that Takumi doesn't have any bad intentions, but she firmly refuses to let him make a single slave handle both housework and combat. She's willing to do business with him only if he agrees to purchase 2 separate slaves for the roles. With that in mind, she mentions that she knows someone who would be perfect as a housekeeper and calls Maria into the room. Maria, who was forced into slavery as a child, has been trained extensively in reading, writing, mathematics, and general housekeeping, making her an excellent candidate for the job. Maria confidently states that she's capable of managing all the housework for a mansion on her own, which reassures Takumi. However, Maria notices that he seems lost in thought and asks if something is bothering him. Takumi tells her he's just a little confused since he doesn't understand why no one has bought Maria yet, considering how cute and capable she is. Maria gets all embarrassed by Takumi calling her cute, so he apologizes since it might have been inappropriate to say. Maria calms down and tells Takumi that she can only do the housekeeping work outlined in the contract and nothing else. Takumi says he's fine with that since he only wants her to do housekeeping work, but Maria wants to make it very clear that she won't do anything else. Takumi doesn't understand why she's talking about it so much since Mulan already explained how these contracts work, but then Maria blurts out that she can't sleep with Takumi. Takumi feels flustered as well, but reassures Maria that his intentions are genuine. He only wants her as a housekeeper, not anything inappropriate. With that clarified, Takumi asks Maria if she's still willing to form a contract with him, to which she happily agrees. With the matter settled, Mulan announces that she'll begin drafting the contract for Maria. However, when it comes to a battle servant, Mulan explains that she doesn't currently have anyone who meets the criteria. Hearing this, Maria calls her out, claiming that Sophia is still around. Mulan doesn't appreciate being challenged and sharply tells Maria to return to her room and start packing her belongings. After Maria leaves, Takumi asks Mulan if what Maria said is true. Mulan confirms that there is indeed a battle slave in the building, but warns that Sophia might not be a good match for him due to her many money issues. Milan attempts to end the conversation, but Takumi, intrigued, requests to meet Sophia. Reluctantly, Milan agrees and takes him to her room. When they arrive, Sophia is startled to see that the visitor is the boy she encountered in the courtyard earlier. Milan explains Sophia's background, revealing that she was captured as a war slave during the conflict between the Kingdom of Triaria and the Kingdom of Ugar events that took place over 50 years ago. Takumi is shocked to discover that Sophia is over 50 years old, leading Milan to explain that the Kingdom of Ugar was an elf nation, and elves naturally have much longer lifespans. Milan then details why Sophia has struggled to form a contract with anyone. She bears a noticeable scar on her ears, and both her right hand and left leg have limited mobility. These physical issues alone make her unsuitable for most seeking a battle slave, but on top of that, she has also lost her ability to use elemental magic, a defining trait of elves indicating she might be cursed. Given all this, Milan doubts that Sophia could be of any help to Takumi on his quests. Despite her concerns, Takumi insists on assessing the situation himself and requests some time alone with Sophia. Milan hesitantly agrees and leaves the room. Once they're alone, Takumi gently holds Sophia's face and looks into her eyes. Though he's not fond of using appraisal on people without consent, Takumi feels it's necessary to understand what he's dealing with. When he examines Sophia's status screen, he's stunned to see that her stats are incredibly high. While her injuries and curse do limit her abilities, Takumi realizes that if he can fix those issues, she would be an ideal battle companion. Soon after, Milan returns to the room and asks if Takumi has made his decision. He confidently states that he wants to take Sophia. Surprised, Sophia reminds him of all her flaws, but Takumi assures her that he'll fix everything, so it won't be an issue. Impressed by his confidence, Milan agrees to entrust Sophia to Takumi's care. A few minutes later, Milan finalizes the terms of the contract, and the final step is to execute it. The three gather together as Milan uses magic to bind them to the agreed terms. Once the process is complete, Maria and Sophia officially become Takumi's slaves. Maria expresses her gratitude to Takumi for choosing her and vows to work hard to meet his expectations. With Sophia echoing the sentiment, the trio eventually heads back to Takumi's house, and the moment he opens the door, Maple excitedly leaps out to greet him. Concerned for Takumi's safety, both Maria and Sophia immediately tense up, with Sophia preparing to attack. However, Takumi quickly stops her and explains that Maple is actually his pet killer spider. Though puzzled by the revelation, the two decide to accept it and act as if it's completely normal. A little while later, Takumi shows them to one of the empty rooms in the mansion. Sophia and Maria really like it, so Takumi tells them that Sophia can have this one and Maria can take the room next door. Neither of them can believe that Takumi is willing to give them their own rooms, but it's not like he's using the rooms anyway, so he thinks it would be nice if someone got some use out of them at least. Additionally, there is also a large bath, so he tells them that once they are done unpacking, they can use the bath whenever they like, and Maria is really excited about it. Later, while taking a bath together, Maria shares how pleased she is that Takumi chose to purchase Sophia as well. She admits she never believed Milan would let Sophia go, as Milan had spent the past 50 years refusing to sell her, no matter how much was offered. For Milan to sell Sophia to Takumi, she must have seen something trustworthy in him. Sophia agrees that Takumi seems kind, but remains a bit wary since they know so little about him. During the contract preparations, Sophia caught a glimpse of Takumi's file and noticed that much of his background information, such as his hometown and lineage, was left blank. This makes her suspect that he might be intentionally hiding something. After they are done with their bath, they head outside and are shocked to see that Takumi already prepared dinner for them. Maria is especially devastated since household work is meant to be her job, so if Takumi handles everything himself, then she's as useless as a toilet. Takumi explains that he was just trying to make Maria's first day on the job a little easier, but if it makes her feel better, he will let her handle the rest of the chores on her own. For now, he asks them to sit down so they can all have dinner together. But Sophia is hesitant since servants usually don't get to eat at the same table as their master. Takumi understands that she may think his behavior is strange for a slave owner, but he doesn't want her to get stuck on tradition. On the topic of tradition, Takumi mentions that he's not particularly fond of being called master all the time and suggests that they call him by his name instead. Sophia, however, asks if this is a formal order. Takumi clarifies that he doesn't want to force her to call him by his name if it makes her uncomfortable. While Maria seems perfectly fine with addressing him by name, Sophia remains a bit reluctant. The next day, Takumi heads to Papex Trading Company to pick up a package he ordered. Papex says he did his best to wrap it up securely, but he still wants Takumi to be careful when carrying it home. On his way home, Takumi notices a church nearby, so he heads inside and kneels down to pray to Nolan. He thanks her for all the skills she gave him since they've really helped him, but there's something he's been meaning to ask her. In the time he has spent in this world, he learned that the Holy Empire of Sidonia controls the religious doctrine here, so he doesn't understand why Nolan has so much problem with them. At that moment, Takumi hears Nolan's voice and notices her standing before him, causing him to momentarily panic. Nolan calmly explains that she heard him praying to her and brought him here for a little chat. Addressing his earlier question, she reveals that she doesn't favor Sidonia because they don't follow her will. She goes on to explain that this world has two main religions, the Church of Creation and the Church of Divine Light. The Church of Creation has faithfully worshipped her since its inception, while the Church of Divine Light operates without regard for her guidance, doing as it pleases. The Sidonia Empire even launched multiple crusades to forcibly spread their religion. Throughout all this, Nolan chose to remain uninvolved, as she had no interest in meddling with humanity's petty disputes. Takumi points out that that was a dumb move since the only reason Sidonia was able to activate the summoning spell that brought him here was because Nolan didn't intervene until it was too late. And yeah, it sounds bad when he puts it like that, but she gave him all her blessings to make up for her mistake. Although, there is something she needs to tell him. Most of her blessings will remain with him forever, but there is one that will fade away, and that's the unusually great luck he has been having recently. She basically gave him a beginner's tutorial by allowing him to meet such nice and helpful people, but soon he will end up meeting people with malicious intentions. From now on, the results of his actions will completely depend on him. Shortly after, Takumi arrives home, only to trip over Maple, who eagerly greets him. Sophia and Maria rush to check on him, but when Sophia tries to take the package he brought, he quickly stores it in his item box to keep her from touching it. He then informs them that he'll be working in his workshop for a while and requests not to be disturbed. Sophia, noticing the package was wrapped in high-grade magical paper, grows suspicious, suspecting it might contain something dangerous. Unable to ignore her doubts, she follows Takumi to his workshop. There, she is shocked to witness him dipping a knife in poison, deliberately cutting himself, and immediately healing the wound. His actions seem bizarre and unsettling. When Takumi casually mentions Maria's name during his experiment, Sophia's suspicions intensify, leading her to believe he has sinister intentions toward Maria. She tries to attack him, but overwhelmed by exhaustion, collapses on top of Takumi instead. Takumi checks her status to figure out what's wrong with her, and he discovers that she is suffering from extreme exhaustion, likely due to her curse. A wound like this normally wouldn't be that difficult to heal, but because of the curse, it takes a lot of effort for Takumi to finally heal her hand. Once he's done, his light magic levels up. He later carries Sophia up to her room, and since his light magic leveled up, he now has enough power to dispel her curse, so he pours all his magic into it, and eventually, he's able to fully heal Sophia as well as lift her curse. She's still unconscious due to exhaustion, but she should be fine once she gets a little rest. A couple of hours later, Sophia wakes up, and upon seeing Maria, she urgently warns her to run, convinced that Takumi is completely insane based on what she witnessed earlier. Maria, however, has no idea what Sophia is referring to, but she's more certain than ever that Takumi is a genuinely good person. To prove her point, Maria holds up a mirror for Sophia, revealing the changes Takumi has made. Sophia is stunned to realize that her body has been healed and her magic restored. Determined to understand, Sophia steps outside to confront Takumi, who confirms that he successfully removed her curse. He explains that it required enduring significant pain and effort to level up his skill, but he reassures her that she doesn't need to feel burdened by it. After After all, he had promised to heal her. Sophia comes to the realization that she had entirely misjudged Takumi. Overwhelmed with gratitude for the kindness he has shown her, she kneels before him and solemnly vows to serve him faithfully for the rest of her life. The following morning, Takumi makes his way to the library to search for information about alchemy, only to discover that the entire library contains just 4 books on the subject. Puzzled, Takumi wonders why alchemy isn't more widely practiced, especially since it seems so straightforward to grasp. However, the truth is that alchemy is far from simple. The available texts on alchemy are written in the ancient language of this world, and the only reason Takumi can make sense of any of it is thanks to the blessing Nolan gave him, which allows him to understand every language in this world. Later that day, Takumi, Maria, and Sophia finish making a large batch of toilets. While there's still plenty more to make, they've been making steady progress. Takumi figures he'll be able to take a break from toilet making for a while, since he won't be working on more toilets for the time being. Maria asks what he plans to do next. Takumi explains that he's planning to go on some journeys in the near future. Specifically, he wants to search for new alchemy ingredients, take in the unique sights this world has to offer, and maybe even explore some ruins along the way. He's already decided to take Sophia along as his bodyguard, so he's going to need Maria to stay behind and look after the house while he's away. Maria, however, isn't thrilled with the idea. She asks Takumi if she can join him on his journey, but he doesn't think it's a good idea since the trip is likely to be dangerous. Besides, he mainly hired Maria to take care of the mansion, so taking her along would defeat the purpose of having a maid. While Maria understands his reasoning, the thought of being left alone in the mansion makes her feel incredibly lonely, so she pleads with Takumi to reconsider. Takumi feels guilty about leaving Maria by herself, but before making a decision, he decides to check something. He grabs Maria's face and uses appraisal to examine her stats. To his surprise, Maria is quite impressive. Her skills are excellent, not overpowered, but definitely strong enough to hold her own in a fight. With that, Takumi agrees to let her come along, as long as she's confident she can handle the journey. Sophia offers to train Maria in magic and combat to ensure she's prepared for any potential dangers, and Takumi likes the idea. He then asks Sophia to train both him and Maria. Now that it's settled that Maria will be joining the expedition, Takumi decides it's time to start crafting equipment for everyone. Before getting to work, he asks Sophia what kind of weapon she'd prefer. Without hesitation, Sophia begins listing an extensive arsenal of weapons. She requests a longsword, a 2.5-meter spear, a bow, and 2 knives. That level of preparation is no surprise, given her experience as a seasoned warrior. Maria, on the other hand, isn't very familiar with weapons, though she did receive some basic short sword training from Milan. She tells Takumi that a set of battle knives should be sufficient for her. However, Sophia points out that relying solely on battle knives would leave Maria at a disadvantage in terms of reach, so she suggests adding a spear to her arsenal. Since Maria doesn't know how to use a spear, Sophia offers to give her some quick training to teach her the basics. While they work on that, Takumi gets started on crafting the weapons. It doesn't take him long to finish making all the blades, but the process uses up a significant amount of his mana, forcing him to drink a mana potion to recover before he can continue. The final step for the blades is for Takumi to cast an attack and auto repair enchantment on them, so he doesn't have to perform maintenance as often. Once that's done, the blades are finally complete. Now, he's going to move on to the handles, but since Maria requested battle knives, she's going to need a sheath for them, and even though Takumi is a gentleman, he's still a man of culture, so imagining Maria's thick thighs with knives on them nearly makes him pass out. Next up, Takumi needs to craft armor for the girls. Instead of directly asking them to let him take their measurements, he comes up with a more convenient solution. He opens his item box and pulls out 2 life-size dolls of Maria and Sophia that he had previously created using his appraisal X skill. Just don't ask why he made them in the first place. As for the armor itself, Takumi plans to make it using maple silk and some of the carapace and hide he got from the armored boar. When it comes to the design, he's never had the chance to make armor for others before, so he decides to let his mind run wild and try out all his outfit fantasies with those dolls. After several days and multiple redesigns, Takumi finally presents the armor to Maria and Sophia, and it looks fantastic on them. He asks if they like it, and both are genuinely surprised by how perfectly it fits. especially since Takumi never took their measurements. It's almost as if he had exact replicas of them. Suddenly, Maple starts to spill the beans about the dolls Takumi used, but he quickly covers Maple's mouth before she can say anything further. To divert their attention and avoid suspicion, Takumi shifts the conversation, asking them what they think of the weapons he crafted for them. Sophia pulls out the sword Takumi made for her, and she says it feels perfect. The same goes for Maria as she tests out her battle knives, and she is grateful for the equipment he made for her. There's one more thing Takumi made for the two of them, so he pulls out some rings and tells them it should help with their magic casting. Sophia and Maria accept the rings, but they feel bad about troubling Takumi so much since rings like these are bound to consume a ton of mana. Takumi admits that it was exhausting, but it helped him level up his ice and lightning magic, so it was well worth the effort. Once all the equipment had been tested, the three of them head to the guild so Takumi can register Maria and Sophia as adventurers. Since it's their first time at the guild, Maria and Sophia are both assigned the H rank. While they're there, the receptionist reminds Takumi that he needs to complete at least one quest to maintain his adventurer status. Takumi then heads over to the mission board to look for a suitable quest. He's aiming to pick an H or G rank quest to keep things simple, but Sophia suggests he go for a higher difficulty quest instead, as it would help him raise his rank more quickly. A couple of bastards overhear that Takumi is H rank, so they think they can intimidate him into running away so they can have fun with Sophia and Maria. They tell Takumi that they are all D rank, so there's no way he could handle them all at once, and they have no problem with beating up a random guy for fun. Maria is about to step in and knock some sense into these idiots, but Takumi stops her and says he will handle it himself. He's absolutely terrified, but these guys not only disrespected him, but more importantly, they disrespected his friends, so he can't back down. The D rank adventurers are insulted that an H rank rookie like Takumi would dare to challenge them, so the pot-bellied guy throws a punch at him with all his strength. Takumi doesn't even bother dodging, letting the punch land, but the only one who gets hurt is the D rank guy, as he ends up breaking his hand from the impact. Suddenly, the guild master, Barak, arrives on the scene, demanding to know what happened since fighting is strictly forbidden in the guild. Initially, he assumes Takumi is the one at fault because Takumi is completely unharmed, while the other guy has a broken arm. However, Maria quickly defends Takumi, insisting he didn't do anything wrong. The receptionist also steps in to confirm their story, explaining that all Takumi did was stand there and take a punch to the face. The guild master still wants to get to the bottom of this, so for now, he asks someone to drive the potbelly guy away and tells Takumi and his party to come with him since he has a few questions to ask. He believes that Takumi was just defending himself, but he doesn't understand how he did it and would like an explanation. Takumi is a little uncomfortable about revealing personal skill information, but the guild master assures him that all this information will remain confidential. In that case, Takumi explains that when the guy threw the punch at him, he opened his item box and pulled out a bit of charcoal, which he then used to cover his body for defense. To make sure he wouldn't get hurt, he synthesized the charcoal into diamond. That explains how he broke that guy's fist without doing anything. While they're on the subject, the guild master suggests promoting Takumi to D rank immediately. It's clear he has the skills to qualify, and having a higher rank would deter fools like the last guy from targeting him just because he's accompanied by attractive women. However, Takumi feels it wouldn't be right to receive an automatic promotion for such a reason. Hans then proposes that Takumi and his party take on a few challenging quests to earn their rank promotion fairly. Both Sophia and Maria think this is a solid idea, so Takumi agrees to go along with it. The quest they were assigned involves exterminating goblins and kobolds and gathering merle herbs. They head out into the forest to begin. Maple acts as the group scout and warns them that there is a group of 4 goblins ahead. Sophia takes the initiative and volunteers to handle the first 2, so she dashes forward and cuts them down in one swing. The remaining 2 are tripped up by Maple's web, and once they fall to the floor, Maria and Takumi stab them through the neck. Takumi is pleased with how well they've been handling the monsters, but he can't help but notice just how many they've been encountering in this area. They've already taken down nearly 100 goblins and kobolds, which leads Sophia to suspect that there might be a monster encampment nearby. If that's true, then it's highly likely that a goblin general is present as well. A goblin general is a C-rank monster, meaning it would usually require at least 5 D-rank parties to defeat it. But with Sophia's spirit magic, Maria's earth magic, and Takumi's elemental magic, she is confident that they should be able to beat it. Takumi still feels a bit uneasy about taking on such a challenge, but since Maria and Sophia seem so confident in their strength, he's willing to go along with it, not to mention they still have Maple on their side. Out of nowhere, Maple informs Takumi that she's about to evolve and can no longer participate in the fight. Takumi nods in understanding and opens a pocket dimension for her to rest in. However, this leaves Sophia and Maria full of questions, wondering when Takumi learned to create pocket dimensions. Takumi casually dismisses their curiosity, claiming it's just one of his skills. More importantly, he points out that with Maple out of commission, they won't have as much support as they initially planned. Despite this, Sophia remains confident that they can still manage to succeed. They soon arrive at the goblin camp, and after a little reconnaissance, Sophia concludes that there are around 400 goblins here. Takumi asks her if they really have to fight all those goblins, and normally they would. But Sophia's reconnaissance also revealed that there are no humans in the area, so they are free to blow this place up with magic. The three of them prepare their strongest attack spells, and all at the same time, they unleash hell on the goblin camp. By the time they are done, almost all the goblins have been killed, so the only ones left are the goblin general and a few of the goblin knights. Sophia decides to take on the goblin knights, leaving Takumi to deal with the goblin general. Instead of engaging it directly with his spear, he chooses to set it on fire, quickly finishing it off. Once they confirm that all the goblins have been eliminated, they collect the magic stones and head back to the guild, completely drained from all the effort. The three of them can barely stand. Hans is astonished that they managed to complete their quest and even defeat a goblin general in just half a day. He then asks them to step into the meeting room because the guild master wants to have a word with them. Barak is both amazed and angry that Takumi would do something as reckless as face an entire goblin camp with this single party. But just as he is about to begin scolding Takumi, his pocket dimension opens up, and Maple pops out. She has now evolved into an arachne, so everyone is excited to see her new form. At this point, Barak decides to just let the whole reckless battle thing slide since Takumi's party clearly isn't normal. When they arrive back home, Maria asks Takumi if he has any spare cloth, so she can make some underwear for herself and Sophia. However, Takumi comes up with a much better design idea and offers to make it for her instead. Just then, Maple emerges from the pocket dimension and informs Takumi that Papek has arrived to see him. Takumi goes to meet him and learns that Marcus Godwin, the Lord of Bolton, has requested an audience with him. While Takumi would prefer to avoid meeting Marcus Godwin, the circumstances leave him with no other option. Takumi eventually arrives at Godwin's castle, and fortunately, Godwin turns out to be a reasonable man. The first thing he does is express his gratitude to Takumi for creating all those toilets, which have significantly improved the town's sanitation. He also acknowledges Takumi's efforts in taking down the goblin encampment, which would have posed a serious threat if left unchecked. Recognizing Takumi as a valuable asset to the nation, Godwin advises him to be cautious, as it's only a matter of time before Sidonia sets its sights on him. A few days later, Takumi finally completes the underwear for Sophia and Maria, but the process turned out to be much more challenging than he expected, leaving him completely exhausted. Sophia and Maria are thrilled with the results and praise the design, expressing their gratitude. Absent-mindedly, Takumi asks if they'd like to try the underwear on now so he can check the fit. A moment later, he realizes how inappropriate that sounded and bolts out of the room in embarrassment. Sophia and Maria, however, are a bit disappointed, as they were more than willing to do it if he had stayed. A few days later, Takumi needed to cool down, so he chose refrigerators as his next project. Once he completed them, he explained to the girls that these fridges would help keep food cold, preventing it from spoiling. They were all thrilled as they felt the chilly air coming from the appliance. To make the refrigerators, Takumi combined iron, chromium, and nickel to produce stainless steel, then incorporated a magical device infused with cooling magic. Maria expressed her gratitude to Takumi, as she could now prepare meals using fresh ingredients whenever she wished. Takumi planned to give one of the fridges to Maria, while the other two would be sent to Papik for him to sell. With that task completed, Takumi was ready to move on to his next project. Sophia asked if he was planning to create something new again, but in reality, Takumi was considering upgrading their equipment instead. There were a few adjustments he had been wanting to make ever since their battle with the goblins, and with their upcoming journey, he wanted their gear to be in the best possible condition. With that in mind, he decided to craft a set using mithril and adamantite. Takumi went to the guild to ask Hans if there were any blacksmiths around who had experience working with mithril and adamantite. However, since these metals were extremely rare, there weren't many craftsmen with the necessary skills. If Hans had to make a guess, the only ones capable of handling them would be the dwarves from Namstal. But since that was far away, traveling there wasn't an option for Takumi. Takumi resigned himself to the fact that he wouldn't be able to find a suitable blacksmith after all. However, just before he left, Hans mentioned a city called Horas, located northwest of the kingdom of Barkila. If Takumi traveled there, he should be able to find some mithril and adamantite. The only issue was that gaining access might be tricky, as only members of the blacksmith guild were permitted to enter the mines. Fortunately, Hans had a clever way to work around the rules. Hypothetically speaking, if Takumi were to accept a quest to eliminate the monsters that had appeared in the mine and, purely by chance, happened to stumble upon some mithril in the process, well, nothing would be preventing him from extracting the metals himself. At that moment, the guild master suddenly appeared and mentioned that he had the perfect quest for Takumi. He explained that the guild had been running low on treant wood recently, and with winter approaching, they needed someone to gather more. Since treants often roamed near the Horas mines and Takumi was already looking for a reason to go there, the guild master figured he wouldn't mind doing a bit of wood collecting along the way. Moreover, since Takumi was already planning to head there, the guild master wanted him and his party to escort someone as well. However, this was beginning to feel like a lot of work, since Takumi had never taken on an escort mission before. He asked why the members of Lion Fang couldn't handle it instead. The guild master explained that Lion Fang was currently out on a separate mission, so they couldn't do it, and Takumi was the only other person he could ask. Takumi eventually agreed to take on the escort mission, but he still didn't know much about the route to Horas, so he asked Hans how long it would take to get there. Hans explained that the journey would take 7 days by horse-drawn carriage, but if Takumi used a monster horse instead, he could cut the travel time down to just 4 days since they were twice as fast as regular horses. Thinking it was a great idea, Takumi asked if he could take one, but unfortunately, Reel arrived just in time to inform them that all the monster horses were already being used by Lion Fang. Hans was surprised to see Reel return so soon, but Reel explained that he and his party hadn't finished their quest, yet he had simply taken down a black buffalo along the way and came back to drop it off before it spoiled. Since he needed to head back out in the morning to rejoin the rest of Lion Fang, he planned to stay in town for the night. Seeing this, Takumi offered him a place to stay at his house and the chance to take a bath. Reel was excited by the prospect of a bath, so he decided to take Takumi up on that offer. Takumi was glad to hear it, but he actually had somewhere to go after this, so he said Reel could just wait for him at his house. But Reel said he would rather accompany Takumi in that case. Takumi allowed Reel to accompany him to Papik's company, and while he was there, he successfully persuaded Papik to lend him a couple of monster horses for his mission. However, in exchange, Papik requested that Takumi sell him some of the rare ores he managed to acquire from the Horas mine. Also, about the refrigerator he had brought earlier, Papik really liked it, so he asked Takumi to make some more for him once he got back from his mining trip. Meanwhile, back at Takumi's mansion, Sophia is starting to get really worried that something might have happened to him since he hasn't returned yet. Later that evening, Takumi is walking back home with Reel, and he apologizes for dragging Reel on such a long errand, even though he must be tired from his journey. But Reel doesn't mind since he is the one who said he'd accompany Takumi. At that moment, Reel sensed a hostile gaze fixed on him and Takumi. It was clear right away that he wouldn't stand a chance against this person with his current equipment, so without hesitation, he grabbed Takumi's hand and took off running. However, their pursuer quickly closed the distance and landed a powerful kick across Reel's face. The attacker then revealed herself to be Sophia, who was absolutely convinced that Reel had been trying to kidnap Takumi, so without a second thought, she was ready to cut him down. Just before she could strike Real down, Takumi quickly stepped in front of him and told Sophia she had completely misunderstood the situation. After he explained everything, Sophia knelt down and sincerely apologized to Real for almost killing him over nothing. Fortunately, Real was unharmed and decided to forgive her, though he now had plenty of questions he wanted to ask Takumi, and that list only grew longer when they finally arrived at Takumi's house, where Real was met with the sight of even more cute girls. He asks Takumi what's going on, so Takumi explains that he needed a maid to take care of the house and someone to guard him, so he hired Sophia and Maria. And then there's Maple, who happened to evolve at one point. Real is excited to see Maple again in her new form, and Maple remembers him, but she still doesn't like Real, though. Real dropped to his knees in despair, realizing that both Bogger and Heath were already married, and even Takumi had 2 girlfriends, while he was still single. However, Takumi quickly corrected him, clarifying that he wasn't actually dating either Sophia or Maria. Seizing the opportunity, Real decided to take his chance and asked Sophia if she had ever considered going out with him, but she instantly rejected him, and Maria did the same, and just like that, Real found himself defeated once again. A little while later, as Real is crying in the bath, Takumi talks to Maria and Sophia about the mission he accepted so he can go mine some mithril and adamantite. Sophia thinks it's a good idea since Trent wood is a precious material, and everyone else is on board, so Takumi says they will head out in 3 days' time. The next morning, Real set off to rejoin the rest of Lion Fang. Once he was gone, Takumi decided it was time to start crafting new equipment for his party's upcoming Trent hunt. He obtained a magic-draining tungsten carbide sword, which was already an impressive weapon, but it was far too large to use in its current form. Because of that, Takumi planned to break it down. He attempted to use his alchemy skill on it, but the sword put up resistance, requiring much more effort than usual. However, after some persistence, Takumi finally managed to break the metal down and forge it into 2 separate blades. The blades drain the mana of any opponent who is cut with it, so Takumi is happy with the results, although it left him totally drained. 3 days later, Takumi and his group met with Papek to pick up the carriage he had promised them, and inside, they found the man the guild master had assigned them to escort already waiting. Curious, Takumi approached him, and the man introduced himself as Gambo. With that, the group set off on their journey, but along the way, they made a stop in a nearby field so that Takumi and the others could hunt their Trent. As they ventured into the forest, Sophia noticed a Trent attempting to blend in with the surrounding trees and quickly pointed it out to Takumi. Without hesitation, he charged forward to take it down. The Trent tried to strike back, but with Sophia and Maria covering him, Takumi easily managed to cut it down. However, that was just one Trent. There was still an entire forest full of them left to deal with. It'll take too long to kill each Trent individually, so Sophia suggests that they should use magic, and it seems to be working really well. However, they are soon confronted by an elder Trent, and no matter how much magic they use to attack, it keeps regenerating. The only way to finish it off was to cut down its main body in a single strike, so Sophia instructed Takumi to coat his sword in fire and attack, while she and Maria provided cover. Working together, they finally managed to bring down the leader Trent. With that, their Trent hunting was complete, and they were free to continue their journey to Horus. When they arrived in Horus, the group made their way to the local Adventurers Guild. Once there, Gambo pointed out a quest that called for adventurers to exterminate the iron mole monsters in the mines. These creatures fed on ores, making them a significant threat. By accepting this mission, they would gain permission to enter the mines. A little while later, the group is mining in the mines, and they get really lucky because it doesn't take long for them to find some mithril and adamantite ore. However, the ores attract some monster moles from the ground, so they have to be ready to fight. Just before the mole emerged, Takumi took a moment to think and quickly came up with a clever idea. The moment the iron mole surfaced, he hit it with a burst of light magic, blinding it instantly. As a result, the creature collapsed, making it an easy target to finish off. While Takumi's method was undeniably effective, Sophia and Maria couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed disappointed since it meant they wouldn't get the chance to fight. Since the mining trip was successful, they all return to Bolton a few days later. Once they do, Takumi visits Gambo's shop so he can learn how to work with mithril and adamantite. Gambo explains the process of extracting the metal from the ore, and after a lot of effort, Takumi is able to create some mithril and adamantite, so he starts using it to make all kinds of magic-imbued gear. Once Takumi finished crafting the new gear, he handed it over to Maria and Sophia for them to test out. The girls were amazed at how lightweight yet durable their armor had become, and to their surprise, it even had magic infused into it. Takumi explained that he had imbued their gear with magic that complemented their respective elemental affinities. As for his own armor, he had enchanted it with something called Thunderclap, an ability that provided an extreme agility boost, allowing him to move at incredible speeds. However, the second Takumi tries to do something cool by showing off how fast he is, he ends up crashing face first into a wall. Next, Takumi presented the new weapons he had crafted, along with the enchantments he had placed on them. Both Sophia and Maria were thrilled with their new spears, but Sophia had a special request. She was willing to lay down her life to protect Takumi, so she asked if he could forge a shield for her, allowing her to guard him more effectively. Takumi thinks that's a good idea, but he reminds Sophia that she should value her own life just as much as she values his. Nolan had been observing Takumi the entire time, pleased with the progress he was making. She knew he would need every bit of strength he could muster for the battles that lay ahead. Meanwhile, 1 year in the future, in the kingdom where the other heroes had been summoned, Akira and Yamato stood ready. With their training now complete, they were about to embark on a mission assigned to them by the king of Samandor. Back in Takumi's time, he had just completed the shields that Sophia had requested. However, upon seeing how much effort and energy it took out of him, she couldn't help but feel guilty. She wished Takumi had an assistant who could help him with his production, making his workload a little easier. Meanwhile, in the royal capital, the Lord received a letter from Sidonia. It appeared that word had spread about Takumi's toilets and the purification magic infused in them. Although they had yet to learn who Takumi was, they were already making plans to take action against him. The Church of Divine Light, upon discovering the purification magic toilets being used in Barkula, decided to send a messenger to meet with the king. They quickly made an official appeal to the Pope in Sidonia. As a result, they convinced the Pope to declare that purification magic is a divine gift from their god, meaning they alone should have the right to use it. Consequently, they demand that the king of Barkula surrender the patent for the purification magic circle. On top of that, they insist that the king reveal the identity of the person responsible for creating these purification devices in the first place. The king hears out the church's demands, but since they are outright ridiculous, he decides to disregard them completely. The church's messenger is stunned that the king would have the audacity to defy the church and, in response, threatens to command all the priests stationed in Barkula to return to Sidonia immediately. However, the king remains unfazed by this threat and, in fact, goes so far as to encourage him to follow through with it. Takumi eventually learns about the king's decision and feels relieved that the king didn't betray him. However, he can't help but feel a bit uneasy about how strongly the king rejected the Church of Divine Light. With Sidonia's church likely to turn against Barkula, Takumi would hate to be the cause of such a major conflict, but Papik reassures him that there's no need to worry. After all, the Church of Divine Light isn't the only religious group in this world, there's also the Church of Creation. Even though the Church of Divine Light holds significant influence, there are still plenty of followers of the Church of Creation in this country, so their absence won't be a huge loss. On top of that, the priests of the Church of Creation offer recovery magic to anyone in need, whereas the Church of Divine Light demands exorbitant fees for any holy magic. Since the Church of Divine Light is backed by Sidonia, Takumi will likely have to steer clear of them from now on, but that's just how things are. Anyway, the reason Papik came to see Takumi today is that he had previously shown the king Takumi's toilet and refrigerator, and the king was so impressed that he requested Papik to bring Takumi to meet him. Takumi feels a bit uneasy about meeting someone as important as the king, but Papik reassures him that it's not a command he's free to decline if he chooses. That said, Papik is really hoping he'll accept, as it would greatly benefit his company's relationship with the royal capital. Takumi ultimately agrees to the meeting. That evening, he shares the news with Sophia and Maria, asking if they would be willing to accompany him to the royal capital. Bacalados both eagerly express their desire to go with him, so he proposes that they set out in a week. However, there's plenty to prepare in the meantime. Since the journey to the royal capital will take around 7 days, Maria will need to prepare a substantial amount of food in advance. While Maria handles that, Takumi mentions that he'll be working on new cloaks for both her and Sophia. He recently received some dark element magic stones from Paypak, and by using them to craft the cloaks, he can enchant them with a perception blocking spell. While such a spell would be incredibly useful in battle, Takumi's main reason for making it is to ensure that Sophia and Maria won't be bothered when they arrive in the royal capital. Later on, Sophia and Maria go out shopping, and while selecting some fruit, Maria grumbles that Takumi doesn't have enough confidence in himself. Sophia agrees, noting that he's good-looking, possesses remarkable alchemy skills, and has an incredible talent for invention. She continues enthusiastically listing all of Takumi's great qualities, but Maria can't help but notice just how excited Sophia gets when talking about him. This makes her suspect that Sophia might actually be in love with him. Sophia denies having such impure thoughts and says she only loves Takumi as her master. But Maria knows there's a love story in there somewhere. Meanwhile, back at the town's church, Takumi kneels before the statue of Nolan to offer a prayer. Before long, a radiant light envelops him, and he suddenly finds himself in Nolan's domain, where she greets him warmly. It's been some time since she last saw him, and she's already heard about his invitation to the royal capital. So, if he's here to pray for a safe journey, she playfully remarks that he really should have brought her an offering. Takumi explains that he's actually here because he has a few questions he wants to ask. The Church of Divine Light worships a goddess named Anat, so his first question is whether there really is another goddess besides Nolan. Without hesitation, Nolan firmly states that she is the only true goddess in this world. But if that's the case, then Takumi asks what Anat is meant to be. Nolan doesn't want to reveal too much, so she says Takumi will find out about that when the time comes. While he's here, Takumi also takes the opportunity to ask Nolan if she knows what happened to the other heroes who were summoned alongside him. It's been 10 months since he arrived in this world, and under normal circumstances, an event as significant as summoning heroes from another world would have caused a huge stir. Yet, oddly enough, Takumi hasn't heard anyone mention it. Nolan decides to be honest and admits that when she summoned Takumi, she tampered with time a bit, sending him 1 year into the past. In other words, the heroes technically haven't even been summoned yet. It will still be a few more months before that happens. However, Takumi is confused as to why she would go through all the trouble of sending him back in time, so he asks her to explain. Unfortunately, Nolan says his time's up, so she won't be answering any more questions for now, and she also asks him to bring her sweets as an offering next time he visits her. Takumi tries to tell her he has more questions to ask, but Nolan chops him on the head, knocking him back down to the mortal world. Takumi eventually wakes up on the church floor, feeling like Nolan had been dodging his questions about the other heroes. However, since he has no plans to get involved with them anyway, it doesn't really matter. He then heads back home to finish the new cloaks he had been working on for the girls. Once they're ready, he gives them to Maria and Sophia, who both absolutely love the designs. Hearing their praise makes Takumi happy, but there's still something else he wants to work on before their trip. He takes both of them to his workshop and reveals his next project, a carriage of his own. With all the traveling they've been doing lately, he figures it would be much more convenient to have a comfortable carriage they can use whenever they need, rather than constantly borrowing one. However, even if he builds the carriage himself, he still doesn't have a horse to pull it, so he's thinking of borrowing one from the guild. But Maria quickly tells him there's no need for that, they can simply get one themselves. The Forest of Death outside Bolton is teeming with monsters, and if they search long enough, they might be able to find a unicorn or a drake horse, both of which would be much faster than an ordinary monster horse. Maria seems especially excited about the idea of going out to catch one, but Takumi can't help but feel a bit uneasy. Eventually, they set off in search of a horse, and as they make their way into the forest, Takumi turns to Sophia and asks if drake horses are really that much faster than the monster horses they typically borrow from the guild. She confirms this and tells him that a drake horse possesses speed, stamina, and durability that far exceeds that of a regular monster horse. The drake horses look pretty much the same as regular horses, but they have a huge rhino-like horn and dragon scales along their body, so it should be pretty easy to spot if they come across one. Just then, Maple calls out to the three of them and says they should hurry up so they can find a horse already. Maple is clearly full of energy, but that's mainly because she's excited about getting a new companion once Takumi forms a familiar contract with a horse. However, before the others can catch up to her, Sophia suddenly senses a monster nearby and instinctively readies her sword. A moment later, a bush wolf leaps out of the bushes, but instead of attacking, it simply runs past them. Takumi confidently points out that the wolf didn't notice them thanks to their anti-perception cloaks. While Sophia is certainly impressed by how well the cloaks work, she suggests that it might be a good idea to take them off so they can actually engage in some monster fights. A few moments after taking the cloak off, Sophia manages to slay a boar in a single blow. Maria thinks this is great since she can prepare the boar meat for them to use on their trip. Maple is getting impatient and tells everyone to hurry up already, but then Takumi notices a dead tree on the ground and he could really use the wood since he's making a carriage. So he and Sophia get ready to begin cutting it up. Now that Maria is preoccupied with the meat and Takumi is focused on the tree, Maple grows impatient waiting for them and decides to venture ahead on her own to find a horse. As she makes her way through the forest, she notices an unusual number of dead trees scattered around the area, making her wonder what could have caused such destruction. Continuing deeper into the forest, she eventually stumbles upon a drake horse lying on the ground, and from the looks of it, it's in pretty bad shape. Maple cautiously approaches the drake horse and asks if it's injured. In response, the drake horse immediately fires a lightning strike at her, forcing her to back away. However, she quickly realizes that it's just acting out of fear due to its wounds. She understands that feeling all too well, as it's exactly how she felt before Takumi found her. Wanting to reassure the creature, she gently tells it that there's no need to worry, her master is a really kind person, and once he arrives, he'll heal its wounds. All they have to do is wait a little longer. But it doesn't look like they'll be able to wait in peace because two termite monsters suddenly show up, and they don't look friendly. Maple realizes that the termites are the ones who hurt the drake horse, so she uses her webs to capture them and throws their bodies in front of the horse to be electrocuted. But there are a lot more termites, so they might be in trouble here. To shield both herself and the drake horse, Maple quickly spins a barrier out of her silk. While it manages to buy her some time, she knows the termites will eventually break through. Desperate, she tries calling for Takumi, attempting to establish a connection with him, but there's no response. Growing anxious, she starts to worry that he might have gotten so caught up in his excitement over the wood, he found that he completely forgot about her. Hopelessness sets in as the termites finally tear through her barrier, so Maple closes her eyes and awaits death. However, when she opens her eyes again, she finds Takumi standing over her, and she's so glad that she's alright. Maple jumps into his arms out of relief. He actually came to save her because she was so worried when he didn't respond to her call. Takumi explains that the likely reason her call didn't go through was the barrier she created. While it was well constructed for blocking attacks, the tightly woven layers also ended up blocking all mana signals, preventing her message from reaching him. However, the moment he realized he had lost Maple's signal, he immediately rushed to her last known location. Once he arrives, he quickly spots the drake horse behind Maple, and she wastes no time asking him to save it. So he extends his hand and tries to use healing magic on it. However, the drake repels him since it doesn't trust Takumi. Sophia tells Takumi that they need to leave soon since there may be more termites in the area, but if they leave the drake out here on its own, it is bound to die. So Takumi decides to put it in his pocket dimension with Maple until they get home. Sophia cautions Takumi that he can't place such a high-level beast into his pocket dimension without forming a contract first, as doing so would put immense strain on his body. However, Takumi is confident that he'll be fine. As it turns out, he was not fine. The moment he placed the drake horse into his pocket dimension, he collapsed almost instantly. Even after the girls brought him back home, he has remained unconscious for the past 12 hours. The fact that the drake is still in his pocket dimension means Takumi's mana will continue to be sapped until he eventually withers away. And he can't open the barrier to let the drake out because he's unconscious. So Sophia gets in touch with Maple and asks her to open the pocket dimension from inside. Maple agrees to help but points out that the drake will likely be scared if it suddenly finds itself in an unfamiliar place. To keep it calm, she decides to set up a tent in the front yard where it can adjust to its new surroundings. Once the drake is released from the pocket dimension, Takumi should start to recover. In the meantime, Maria heads out to buy medical supplies to treat him and asks Sophia to stay by his side so that he has someone with him when he wakes up. Later that day, Takumi finally wakes up from his coma and heads outside to see the drake. Maple has been telling the drake all about Takumi while they waited for him to recover, and after introducing himself, Takumi asks if it would be willing to form a contract with him. The drake trusts Maple, and since she is vouching for Takumi, it agrees to form a contract with him. Now that the drake has been tamed, Takumi can finally use magic on it without worrying about any backlash. Without hesitation, he casts High Heal to mend all of its wounds. In an instant, the drake regains its strength, standing on its own once more, fully restored. Now that the drake is officially one of Takumi's familiars, he needs to give her a name. Since he named Maple after a leaf, he decides to stick with the theme and names the drake Camellia, after the tree that keeps its leaves all year round. Maple is happy that Camellia has fully recovered, and with everything finally settled, Maria calls everyone inside for dinner. She's prepared a feast, and since Takumi hasn't eaten in an entire day due to being unconscious, he definitely needs a good meal. At a slave trading company called Palom, a beast girl named Reva is in the middle of a meeting with a potential master. The client is clearly impressed by her magical abilities, but he inquires whether she can use any practical magic spells. Reva admits that she hasn't learned any useful spells yet, but promises to do her best to master them so she can be of service to him. However, the man declines to purchase her, explaining that he requires someone who can assist him immediately and doesn't have the time to wait for her to train. After the client departs, Reva apologizes to Palom for being rejected once again. However, he reassures her that she shouldn't worry, as the right master for her will eventually come along. Reva tries to stay optimistic, but after spending several years here without finding a master, doubt begins to creep in. She recalls her past life with her younger brother, and how she was forced to sell herself into slavery to earn money and support her family. Yet, despite everything, she still hasn't been able to make a single cent. At Takumi's house, he continues to work tirelessly on finishing his carriage, which is beginning to concern Maria. She asks if he plans to visit Gambo's workshop today, and Takumi confirms, explaining that there's still plenty of blacksmithing work to complete before the trip. Sophia points out that he might be pushing himself too hard aside from all the effort he's pouring into the carriage. He still needs to produce more potions and refrigerators for Paypek. On top of that, he hasn't taken a single break in the past few days, and at this rate, she fears he might end up working himself to death. Takumi appreciates their concern for his well-being, but reassures them that he's perfectly fine before heading out as planned. His first stop of the day is the guild, but as soon as he steps inside, he hears a man desperately pleading with the guild master to believe him, insisting that he witnessed something terrifying. Curious, Takumi approaches the front desk and asks Hans about the commotion. Hans explains that multiple people have reported sightings of a strange creature lurking outside. Takumi inquires about the creature, but no one seems to know exactly what it looks like. However, Hans has drawn a sketch based on the witness's description. Even with the drawing, the creature's identity remains unclear, though Hans isn't too concerned since there haven't been any reports of damage so far. Shifting gears, he asks Takumi what brings him to the guild today. In response, Takumi explains that he's here to register a new pet he recently acquired. Hans is impressed that Takumi has managed to tame yet another pet, and given everything Takumi has done so far, he was already expecting it to be something unusual. However, when Takumi pulls Camilla out of his pocket dimension, Hans is absolutely horrified. Glancing back at his sketch, he quickly realizes that Camilla is the very creature everyone has been terrified of. Now that it's clear Takumi was the cause of all the panic, the guild master drags him into a meeting where he scolds him relentlessly until Takumi Takumi is practically begging for mercy. Meanwhile, Sophia is out in town after returning from a meeting with Mulan. She had gone to ask if Mulan had any slaves with magical abilities who could assist Takumi with his work, but unfortunately, there wasn't anyone who matched that description. Instead, Mulan suggested that Sophia check out other slave trading companies to see if they might have someone who meets the requirements she's looking for. As she makes her way back home, Sophia runs into Maria, who is out shopping for ingredients to prepare lunch. Noticing how worn out Takumi has been lately, Maria wants to cheer him up with a good meal. However, when she and Sophia arrive at Gambo's workshop to check on him, they find Takumi completely passed out in a pile of wood. At first, they are shocked, but Gambo reassures them that there's no need to worry. Takumi simply fell asleep while working. Considering how hard he's been pushing himself without taking a break, it's not surprising, even though he must have been completely exhausted. He kept working with a smile until the moment he collapsed. For now, he'll be fine, but Gambo warns the girls that if they don't get Takumi to slow down, he might actually work himself to death one day. A little while later, after waking up from his nap, Takumi finally completes the carriage, and he looks absolutely proud of his accomplishment. And rightfully so, he essentially defied the laws of physics to create it. While it appears to be a regular carriage from the outside, the interior is as spacious as a house. Takumi poured a tremendous amount of effort into enchanting it with spatial magic to expand the inside, and he even equipped it with all the daily necessities to ensure that even the longest journeys will be as comfortable as possible. Everyone climbs aboard to take the carriage out for a test ride, and Maria is absolutely thrilled to be the one driving it. Despite the fact that it's moving at frightening speeds, the ride feels incredibly smooth from the inside, with barely any vibrations, meaning there's no risk of motion sickness. With some time left before their scheduled trip, Takumi tells Maria that if she has any suggestions for additions to the carriage, she's free to let him know. Taking full advantage of the offer, she immediately asks for death spikes on the sides. The spikes serve absolutely no practical purpose. Takumi acknowledges Maria's request but promptly ignores it, and they continue on as usual. A few days later, the time for their trip finally arrives. They pull up to the city gate, where they meet Lion Feng, who will be escorting them on their journey to the capital. Before long, Papek and the others arrive as well, and with everyone now present, Takumi decides it's time for them to set off. However, before they set off, Papek becomes curious about what a carriage built by Takumi would look like, so he asks if he can take a peek inside. Takumi tells him to go right ahead, and the moment Papek steps in and lays eyes on the spacious house-like interior, he completely loses it. In a frenzy, he bombards Takumi with questions, demanding to know how he managed to create such an extraordinary carriage, and even offering to pay a hefty sum for the secret. But before he can get too carried away, Lord Godwin steps in and knocks some sense into him, reminding him not to make Takumi uncomfortable. But then, Godwin starts loudly proclaiming how much he would love to have a carriage as magnificent as Takumi's. While he's not outright ordering Takumi to make one for him, he casually mentions that if Takumi were to gift him one, he'd be so grateful that he'd be willing to pay 100 platinum coins in return. Takumi quickly does the math in his head and realizes that 100 platinum is roughly equivalent to 1 billion yen. With that kind of money on the line, how could he possibly refuse? For now, the group sets off on their journey, with Takumi and his party riding in his carriage, while Godwin and Papek travel in their own respective carriages. As they make their way forward, Godwin discusses with his assistant just how invaluable Takumi has become to the kingdom since his arrival. He has no doubt that Takumi will continue to achieve even greater things, but with such accomplishments, he is certain to attract unwanted attention. While both the king and Godwin will do everything in their power to protect Takumi from any internal threats within the kingdom of Barkula, dealing with the Empire of Sidonia will be an entirely different challenge. Speaking of the Empire of Sidonia, we take a look into the future after the other heroes were summoned, and Akane is reading an old Sidonia history book to gather as much information as she can. The book talks about the goddess Anat that Sidonia worships, and it says she created humanity in her likeness. Then, she created beastmen from beasts and elves from sprites, all to serve under mankind. That is why beastmen in the Empire of Sidonia are treated so poorly, and Akane can't stand it. Back in Takumi's time, he and the others have just arrived at the capital, and he's relieved that they made it safely without encountering any attacks. However, the only reason for their smooth journey was that Takumi's party took out every monster that so much as got close to them. In fact, Lion Fang, who was supposed to be their bodyguard, ended up doing absolutely nothing the entire time. Just then, Papik approaches Takumi and says he has something to talk to him about. So, once they reach the inn, he tells Takumi that he wants to gift the king a carriage similar to the one Takumi made for himself. He already talked this over with Lord Godwin, and he thinks this would be the perfect way to demonstrate Takumi's expertise to the king. However, since their audience with the king is only 5 days away, Papik doubts that Takumi will be able to complete a carriage in such a short time. He suggests they wait until the next time they have an audience with the king instead. Surprisingly, though, Takumi insists that he can finish it within the 5-day window. If he were to build it after returning home, he'd then have to transport the carriage all the way back to the capital, which would be far too much hassle. So, he figures it would be much more convenient to just construct it while he's already here. It shouldn't be too hard to find the necessary materials in the capital, but the main problem is that Takumi needs somewhere to begin building, and he doesn't have a workshop in the capital. Thankfully, Papik says he knows the perfect place for Takumi to do all his work, the Palm Company. Takumi later meets with Maria and Sophia to tell them about Papik's proposition for him to work at the Palm Company, and Sophia happens to know a bit about the Palm Company, so she tells Takumi it's one of the more trustworthy slave trading companies in the capital, at least according to what Mulan told her. Papik secured permission for Takumi to use one of the Palm Company's old detached buildings, so as soon as the materials arrive, Takumi plans to start working on the new carriage. However, Sophia refuses to let that happen so easily. She insists that Takumi needs to get himself an assistant. He nearly worked himself to death while building the first carriage, and now he's about to dive straight into making a second one without even taking a break. Even a workaholic like him has to see that he's being reckless with his health. With that in mind, Sophia suggests that while they're already at the Palm Company, he should consider getting himself another slave to help out. Takumi understands that Sophia and Maria are genuinely worried for his well-being, so he agrees to get a new slave. And the next day, he meets with the owner of the Palm Company. Takumi tells him that he is looking for a slave to help him with his alchemy, and since Takumi is currently working on a carriage that has various magical elements, Palm assumes Takumi would need a slave who has magical aptitude. As Takumi is in his meeting, Sophia waits outside. Suddenly, Maria rushes over to her in a panic, frantically saying that she can't find Maple anywhere. Earlier, Maple had mentioned wanting to explore the Palm building, and if anyone spots a massive killer spider wandering through the halls, they're bound to lose their minds. So, Sophia says she's going to go look for Maple before she causes any trouble. Unfortunately, by the time she finds Maple, she has already scared the soul out of Reva, who was just trying to enjoy her book. Maple apologizes for scaring Reva, and Sophia helps her back to her feet. But as she does so, she notices that the book Reva is carrying is a book about alchemy. She asks Reva if she's interested in alchemy, and she begins telling her about how much she loves studying alchemy. A few minutes later, Reva is escorted into the meeting room to meet with Takumi, as Palm recommended her as a suitable candidate for his needs. She greets Takumi and takes a seat so they can start their conversation. However, as Takumi begins explaining the tasks he needs done, Reva is entirely zoned out, preoccupied with the fear of being rejected once more and missing out on the chance to earn money for her family. Just then, Takumi mentions something about meeting someone who is somewhat knowledgeable in alchemy, and as soon as Reva hears the word alchemy, she shoots up because alchemy is her thing. She loves alchemy just as much as Takumi does, so the two start talking about their favorite methods and theories, and Takumi is so impressed by her that he decides to give Reva a little exam. He rips a page from one of his journals and hands it to her, asking if she can determine the purpose of the magic circle. With just one glance, Reva immediately recognizes it as a recompositing circle used for making sweets, but something about it feels off, and she can't quite figure out what it is. Overwhelmed, she begins to panic and bursts into tears, unable to answer Takumi's question. She admits that she doesn't know the answer because this isn't the same sweet spell she's familiar with, fully convinced that Takumi will reject her for failing his test. But instead, he reaches out his hand and invites her to join his party. She was actually correct about the circle being used for making sweets, but the slight difference came from Takumi using different ingredients in his recipes. Regardless, he finds it incredible that she could identify the magic circle's purpose with just a glance, so he tells her he would be thrilled to have her as part of his team. Now that Takumi has accepted Reva, Palom proceeds to create the contract between them, and Reva feels relieved to finally have a job. However, she asks him for a small favor. She wants his help in sending all her wages back to her home village. She explains that her family is struggling with poverty, and she wants to support them as much as she can so her brother can have a better life. Seeing how important this is to her, Takumi finds no reason to refuse her request. Meanwhile, the king of Sidonia is preparing to strike back against the kingdom of Barkula for their refusal to surrender Takumi. As a show of force, he decides to deploy the Holy Knights to make an example of them. But the princess has a different plan. With the kingdom preparing to summon their heroes soon, she intends to spread rumors that will fuel hatred toward the people of Barkula within Sidonia. Then, once their heroes have been summoned, they will seize the opportunity to find an excuse for war and take their revenge. Not long after, Takumi completes the synthesis of the adamantite framework for the carriage, leaving Reva in awe of his ability to craft something so remarkable entirely on his own. She volunteers to start polishing the frame, but as she begins, her spirits sink, overwhelmed by the thought that she could never accomplish something of this caliber. However, Takumi reassures her that although the alchemy circles he used might appear complex, they aren't significantly more difficult than the candy spell. He feels confident that with a bit of practice, Reva will be able to perform alchemy just as skillfully as he can, because, in the end, she possesses the most essential quality for alchemy. With Reva's assistance, Takumi manages to complete the carriage. As Takumi stands there admiring his work, an elderly man approaches and begins examining the carriage as well. He inquires if the carriage belongs to Takumi, to which Takumi replies that he made it, though he clarifies that he's actually planning to give this one to the king. At that moment, the others come rushing over, shouting to grab the king's attention. Realizing they are undoubtedly referring to Takumi, it dawns on him that the man standing beside him must be the king. Takumi is utterly mortified, recalling how casually he had been speaking to him just moments ago. The king assures him that there's no need to worry about formalities, as this is an informal gathering. He explains that he chose to arrange this casual meeting because he finds formal meetings rather dull. Additionally, he was eager to meet the renowned alchemist as quickly as possible so he could personally express his gratitude. Takumi is taken aback to hear that the king wishes to thank him, as he can't quite figure out what he might have done to deserve such gratitude from the king. However, the king reminds him that he was the one who invented the toilets, which resolved the kingdom's sewage issue. As the king, it is his responsibility to express his appreciation. Typically, a grand banquet would be organized in Takumi's honor, and he would be bestowed with various rewards and titles, but doing so would attract too much unnecessary attention toward him. The king understands that Takumi wishes to stay anonymous to avoid becoming a target of Sidonia. He comes across as a genuinely good person, and Takumi feels grateful for his thoughtful and understanding nature. In the end, the king still presents Takumi with a reward for his toilet invention, and afterward, the group sets off on their journey back home. As they depart, the king observes them from his window and orders his attendants to ensure that no one ever discovers Takumi was here today. Simon agrees to instruct everyone in the castle to remain silent about Takumi's visit. However, once Takumi's goods begin to be exported beyond Barkula, his influence will expand so widely that it will become impossible to prevent Sidonia from taking action against him. Upon returning to Bolton, Takumi gathers all his slaves to discuss their wages. To his surprise, Maria and Sophia declare that they don't wish to be paid. Maria explains that he already provides her with plenty of food, so she's content with the allowance he gives, while Sophia mentions she doesn't have much use for the salary anyway, so she sees no reason to accept payment. Reva finds it strange that Takumi has to argue just to convince these two to take their rightful earnings. Takumi attempts to explain to Sophia that even if she doesn't need the money at the moment, it's still wise to save it for the future. However, Sophia's mind is firmly set. She's an elf, which means she's certain to outlive Takumi, and even after he passes away, she plans to spend the rest of her life guarding his grave. Maria, though she won't live as long, expresses that she would happily do the same. While the sentiment is touching, Takumi genuinely wishes these two could come up with a future plan for themselves that doesn't involve spending eternity watching over his grave. Meanwhile, back in the Empire of Sidonia, one of the princess's spies has successfully obtained one of Takumi's purification devices. The princess goddess is appalled that someone would dare to replicate holy magic. Rather than rewarding the spy, she refuses to let this act go unchallenged. She is aware that these purification devices originated from the city of Bolton, and she decides to dispatch a small unit to eliminate whoever is responsible for producing them. Back at Takumi's house, he and Reva are in his workshop when Reva suddenly asks if she can register at the Adventurers Guild. Takumi is caught off guard by her request, but Reva explains that she wants to support Takumi as an adventurer, just like Maria and Sophia. Additionally, becoming an adventurer would help her improve her stats, and boosting her stats would enable her to perform more advanced alchemy. When she frames it that way, Takumi understands her reasoning and agrees to let her register. The two of them make their way to the guild, where Reva is issued a guild card, officially joining Takumi's party. On the topic of Takumi's party, Hans tells him to hurry up and come up with a name already. With the exception of Reva, everyone in Takumi's party is already D rank, and with their performance, they are easily one of the guild's top parties, so they can't stay nameless forever. Takumi doesn't see much of a problem in leaving his party without a name, considering he never had any real desire to become an adventurer in the first place. His team lacks a frontline fighter, while Takumi could potentially take on that role with some additional training. He has little interest in actually becoming stronger. Just then, Barak shows up out of nowhere and says he is willing to train Takumi until he's the best frontliner out here. He conveniently chooses to ignore Takumi when he says he isn't interested in any training. Barak hurls Takumi all over the training grounds, insisting that he come up with a name for his party. However, with fear and pain clouding his mind, the only names Takumi manages to think of are related to toilets. As a result, Barak continues tossing him around, refusing to stop until he comes up with something better. Unfortunately, Takumi never manages to think of a suitable name, leaving him battered and bruised by the end of the day. As Maria tends to his injuries, Takumi takes the opportunity to ask if she has any ideas for a party name. However, she turns out to be even worse at naming things than he is, making her no help at all. He then tries asking Sophia for suggestions, but her mind is too consumed by the growing rage inside her. She's absolutely livid that Barak would dare to treat her master like this, and without hesitation, she gets up, ready to storm over to the guild and settle things with her fists before she can go, though Takumi quickly stops her, explaining that Barak was only training him. As painful as it was, his combat stats actually improved quite a bit, so there's no reason to be angry at Barak. 10 months have passed since Takumi was summoned, and in the meantime, the other heroes have been focused on their training. Yamato's combat skills have steadily improved to the point where he is now overpowering the knight assigned to train him. However, Akira sits on the sidelines, mocking Yamato, insisting that such an aggressive fighting style would never hold up in real combat. Akane points out that Akira's own fighting style is just as aggressive, but Akira simply shrugs it off, claiming that as a hero, he's naturally the superior swordsman. He then casually asks if Akane wants to join him in his room for a different kind of training, but Akane ignores him completely and heads straight back to her room. Ever since they got here, Yamato and Akira seem to have changed for the worse, and she doesn't know why. She has been trying to figure out as much as possible about Sidonia and its goddess, Anat, to figure out what's going on, but so far, all she's found is the doctrine of the Church of Divine Light. Their doctrine preaches absolute human supremacy and treats all demi-humans as slaves. On the other hand, she was able to learn a little about the Church of Creation, which worships Nolan and treats both humans and demi-humans equally. However, Sidonia is under the control of the Church of Divine Light, and considering they summoned her and the others as heroes to bring world peace, Akane can't help but shudder at the thought of what the royal family here actually intends for them to do. Returning to Takumi, he gives Reva a ring and a staff, as she wants to contribute to their adventuring. The ring will assist her in activating magic, and since Reva mentioned that she knows how to handle his staff, Takumi crafted one for her using Trent wood and a mithril alloy. Reva is deeply grateful that Takumi created such impressive weapons for her, her, but Maple starts feeling jealous since Takumi never makes weapons for her. However, this time, Takumi did forge a weapon for her, even having Reva assist him in making it, which makes Maple appreciative of both of them. The following day, Takumi resumes training with Barack and attempts to come up with a name for his party as a way to escape the session. However, the best he can come up with is Cat's Claw, which is clearly just a knockoff of Lion's Fang, prompting Barack to lock him in an abdominal stretch hold. Maria tries to assist by suggesting a name, but it's so terrible that Barack immediately rejects it and throws Takumi to the ground. Takumi is getting worried that Sophia might attack Barack if he keeps swinging him around like this. But after seeing the training for herself, Sophia realizes that Takumi is really weak in hand-to-hand combat, so she now thinks the training is necessary. After spending several hours getting tossed around, Takumi finally gets a moment to rest. However, just as he starts to relax, Hans approaches him with an offer to take on an escort mission. Takumi is reluctant since escort missions tend to be quite lengthy, but Barack points out that with his carriage and Camellia, the entire trip would only take 4 days there and back. On top of that, the request comes from Papek's company, meaning that accepting it would be doing Papek a favor. Takumi asks if Lion's Fang can do it instead, since they usually handle Papek's escort quests. But unfortunately, Lion's Fang is currently out on a separate mission, so they can't do it. Takumi still doesn't want to accept the quest, but everyone else seems to think it'll be a good idea, so he is forced to accept. They set off on their journey to the town of Kilbuse, and the man they are escorting expresses his relief, feeling much safer knowing that Takumi and his party will be guarding him. His main goal is to sell basic necessities along with the purification devices, but while he's there, Papek also asked him to pick up some milk. Takumi is surprised to discover that milk exists in this world since he's never come across it before, though it's simply not sold in Bolton. Kilbuse even has other dairy products like cheese, which gets Takumi unexpectedly excited about this trip. Once they arrive at the town of Kilbuse, Takumi has everyone try cream stew for the first time. As they take their first bite, they all think it's really tasty and unique since they've never tasted anything like it before. However, Takumi thinks he could improve this recipe a little, so he says they should buy a lot of cheese and milk before they return home. Luckily, the markets in this town stay open at night, so Takumi can buy as much as he wants right now. That night, they go out to purchase the dairy products, and once they've finished shopping, they all sit down to try them together. Getting to enjoy milk and cheese again reminds Takumi of his past life in Japan, but he doesn't feel any longing for it. His life in this world is far more fulfilling than anything he ever experienced on Earth. Sophia notices that Takumi seems lost in thought, so she asks if something is wrong. He then asks her if she ever thinks about going back to her hometown. Sophia responds that she loves her current life too much to dwell on the past. Having spent 50 years trapped by the curse placed on her, she was finally able to start anew after forming a contract with Takumi. Now, the only thing that matters to her is moving forward alongside Takumi and the others. Everyone else agrees with Sophia's sentiment, and Takumi understands how they feel. Ever since coming to this world, it feels like he has been given wings to live his life as he pleases, and now that he thinks about it, those metaphorical wings are all thanks to Nolan. So, he has finally decided on a name for his party, the Wings of Nolan. After finishing the escort mission, Takumi and the others make their way back to Bolton. However, the moment he steps into his mansion, he senses that something is off. The entire room is filled with paralysis poison, and before he can fully grasp the situation, the girls have already been poisoned and taken captive by 2 masked men. One of the masked men moves in and tries to stab Takumi, but just before the blade can reach him, a web suddenly knocks the knife from his hand. Seizing the moment, Takumi swiftly counterattacks, taking down the first attacker. The second man then lunges at him, but Takumi easily flips him over and knocks him out of the way. With the threats now taken care of, Takumi turns to Maple and thanks her for the assist, acknowledging that she really saved him back there. He then casts Cure to eliminate the poison, allowing the girls to move again. Sophia immediately starts apologizing for failing to protect him, but Takumi reassures her that it wasn't her fault after all, Only he and Maple possess paralysis resistance skills. Speaking of Maple, she asks Takumi what he wants to do with the remaining intruders she captured. She had spotted them sneaking around the house, took them down, and secured them in her webs. Judging by the situation, it's clear that this was a premeditated assassination attempt. Takumi sends Sophia to fetch Barack from the guild, and once he arrives, the captured assassins are taken away. However, Barack advises Takumi that he should report this to the Lord of Bolton, as it seems that Sidonia has finally tracked him down. Takumi later meets with Lord Godwin, and his investigation uncovers that the individuals who attempted to attack him were part of the Divine Light Squadron. This group is essentially a task force dispatched by Sidonia to eliminate anyone they consider a threat to the Church of Divine Light. Takumi is deeply disturbed to learn that Sidonia is genuinely attempting to kill him. He is told that the reason Sidonia is targeting him is due to the purification devices he developed. In the past, the kingdom depended on priests to use holy magic for sewer purification. The priests from the Church of Creation and the Church of Divine Light used to alternate handling the task. And while the Church of Creation provided their services for free, the Church of Divine Light consistently demanded substantial fees. However, with Takumi's invention, priests are no longer necessary for purification, meaning Takumi has effectively deprived the Church of Divine Light of a significant portion of their income. Takumi wonders whether he should go into hiding or perhaps leave the country altogether, but he is reassured that staying in Bolton will be the safest option for him. Since a large portion of this nation's population follows the Church of Creation, it will be difficult for the Church of Divine Light to extend its influence here. As an added measure, the number of patrols by the Knights and City Guard will be increased to prevent any more assassins from the Divine Light from appearing. While that ensures the security of the city, Barack points out that they still need to consider Takumi's safety when he is out on adventuring missions. Takumi looks at him and states that, given the current situation, he plans to put his adventuring on hold for the time being. However, Barack is unwilling to accept that decision. Since Takumi's party ranks among the top 5 in the guild, his absence would negatively impact the guild's metrics, something Barack values far more than the fact that Takumi's life is at risk. Sophia adds to this, saying she will protect Takumi even if it costs her life, so she wants to keep adventuring with him. Takumi is too much of a pushover to refuse either of them, so he ends up agreeing to continue being an adventurer. But as the three of them head back to the guild, Takumi takes a moment to think. It is clear that Sidonia is after his life, but because of him, his friends were put in danger last night, and he needs to do something to keep them safe. When they arrive at the guild, Takumi and Sophia meet up with Hans to finally register their party name before they depart. However, Hans cautions Takumi to stay vigilant. Word about the attack on him has already started to circulate, and there are whispers that a massive bounty has been placed on Takumi's head. Because of this, there's a possibility that some of the adventurers in the guild might attempt to target him. Later that night, Takumi arrives home and shares the bad news with everyone. Upon hearing it, Maria becomes upset, realizing that this means there's a strong possibility of more attacks against them. Takumi apologizes, feeling responsible for putting them in danger, but they reassure him that there's no need to apologize. They all made the choice to stand by his side, no matter what. Besides, they are confident in their strength and believe they can handle anyone who dares to come after them again. Though relieved to have their support, Takumi still can't help but feel a bit uneasy. So, he has been thinking of creating a magical device to raise a barrier around his house. That way, no attackers would ever be able to get close to him or the girls while they are at home. But he still needs to worry about their safety while they are out on adventures. So Sophia suggests he should find someone to act as their party's tank. Takumi agrees, though he has no clue where to begin searching for one. Sophia mentions that there are plenty of solo adventurers around, so they could likely find someone quickly. However, there's no assurance that such a person would be trustworthy, so Takumi decides to look for another slave instead. Everyone retires for the night, with the knights standing guard outside the mansion. But Takumi remains awake, spending the entire night working on his barrier device. The next morning, he calls Reva outside to help him with the alchemy, but surprisingly, Sophia comes over as well and says she wants to help. Takumi is happy to have an extra set of hands, so he agrees to let Sophia help and asks her to etch this magic circle into one of the metal plates he brought out. Once that's finished, Takumi starts sprinkling magic powder onto the metal sheet. As he does this, Sophia asks him if he managed to get any sleep the previous night. Takumi confesses that he stayed up all night, preoccupied with planning defensive measures for the future. Speaking of defensive measures, Maple appears to be training with Camellia. They're practicing Camelia's ram attacks against some doll golems. Reva then realizes that golems fall under the category of alchemy, so if Takumi could create one, it would be ideal to serve as their party's tank. Unfortunately, golems can only function if magic circles are engraved into their control core, and that's still too advanced for Takumi to handle. This means he can't attempt to make one just yet. To even try, he would need his mana manipulation skill to improve significantly. But for now, his priority is completing the barrier, so he starts casting a spell to bind it to the metal plates. Once he finishes, the only step remaining is to position them on the house. Suddenly, Takumi receives a notification that his mana manipulation skill has reached its maximum level and evolved into spell control. This means he might actually be able to attempt creating a golem after all. Meanwhile, in Sidonia, the king has just received news that the Divine Light Squadron has been captured. He is stunned to learn that not only did the squadron fail to eliminate their target, but they also ended up in enemy hands. By now, the kingdom of Barcula has likely interrogated the assassins and uncovered Sidonia's involvement. This situation has turned out to be far more problematic than he had expected. Elizabeth advises the king that, for now, they should halt any further attacks on Barcula and instead concentrate on completing their other mission related to the summoning circle. The king thinks she's right, so he asks Homer for a progress report on the ruined magic circles they found. Homer replies, telling the king that he was unable to analyze the circle completely, but it seems to be functional regardless, so they just need to wait for it to accumulate enough magic power to be activated, meaning it should take about 2 months before they can finally summon their heroes. Back at Takumi's house, he has just completed his first attempt at making a golem, but it ended in complete failure. Crafting multi-layered magic circles for the core turned out to be far more difficult than he had anticipated, meaning he will likely need to level up even more before he can manage it. Maple questions why he even wants to create a golem in the first place, considering he already has all of them, and they are incredibly strong. However, Takumi thinks it would be useful to have a golem guarding the house at all times, even when they go off on adventures together. If that's the case, Maple wonders why he doesn't just search for a wild golem and tame it instead, which turns out to be a brilliant suggestion. Without wasting any time, Takumi begins planning to do exactly that. He then asks Sophia if she knows any good places to find golems, and she informs him that near the Forest of Death, there have been occasional sightings of stone golems. Additionally, if he ventures into the dungeon, there's even a chance he might come across an iron golem inside. Takumi is surprised to hear that dungeons exist in this world, but Sophia is baffled as to how he could possibly not know about them. Takumi makes up an excuse and says he hasn't been inside a dungeon before, but he thinks they should try heading into the dungeon to try finding an iron golem. But Sophia tells him that would be a bad idea because it would be reckless to try to take on the dungeon when they don't have a tank in their team yet. Sophia makes a good point, so Takumi and the others end up heading to the rocky plains and searching for the rock golem. Eventually, they manage to spot one, but it's much larger than they had anticipated. Sophia informs the group that the golem before them is likely a guardian class, and the only way to defeat it would be to target its magic stone. However, Takumi has no intention of killing it. Just then, the golem turns in their direction and begins scanning the area, prompting Sophia and Takumi to quickly duck behind a rock to stay out of sight. Sophia hadn't expected the golem to have a scanning ability, and she's beginning to worry that it might be more than they can handle. As a result, she suggests that they should consider finding a different golem to tame instead. However, Takumi still believes this golem is the best one for the job, as having such a dangerous guardian protecting his house would be enough to ward off most intruders. Without wasting another second, he dashes forward to confront the golem. But just as everyone takes their positions and prepares to fire, Takumi suddenly notices something: the golem isn't actually attacking him. He quickly tells everyone to hold off while he tests a theory. Truth be told, standing so close to the golem fills him with fear, but for some reason, he senses an energy coming from it that feels strikingly similar to Nolan's. This leads him to suspect that the golem was created to guard one of Nolan's ancient ruins, and if that's the case, Takumi believes that the blessing Nolan granted him should be enough to turn it into an ally. He stretches out his arm and attempts to tame the golem, and it actually works out. He has successfully tamed the golem, and he did it without having to fight at all. So the girls are really impressed. Maple asks Takumi what he plans to name the golem now that he has tamed it. So Takumi thinks about it for a second and eventually comes up with a name, Titan. Everyone greets Titan and welcomes him to their team, and it seems like Titan is trying to tell them something, but his body isn't very versatile. So Takumi intends to make him a new one. He informs everyone that they can head home now, but Sophia mentions that bringing a giant golem back suddenly would likely cause a massive commotion. Takumi acknowledges that this could be a problem, so he prepares to place Titan into his pocket dimension. However, before he can do so, Titan starts to crumble and then shrinks himself down into a small rock golem. Now, they can take him to town without causing a major scene, and Takumi assures them that he'll start working on some improvements for Titan as soon as he can. Meanwhile, in the future, Akane continues to watch as her friends become more powerful and depraved with each passing day. The two of them are now strong enough to take out the entire knight squad of the castle, and they are taking great joy in calling all the knights weak as they stand over them. Back at home, Takumi wastes no time and immediately starts working on designing a new body for Titan, feeling genuinely excited about the project. He plans to begin construction soon, but before that, there's something important he needs to address. He gathers everyone for a meeting and announces his decision to dissolve all the contracts he has with them. The girls are stunned by this revelation and quickly ask him why. In response, Takumi explains that as long as they stay by his side, they will always be in danger, and he can't bear the thought of them getting hurt. This has been on his mind ever since they were first attacked, and he assures them that this is the best course of action. The girls ask who will protect him if they aren't around. Takumi says he still has Titan with him, as well as Maple and Camellia, so they don't have to worry about him. He wants the three of them to live somewhere safe, and of course, he's going to pay them a lump sum so they can afford to live comfortably for a while. He tells them to think of it as his final gift to them, but all of a sudden, Maria gets up from her seat and points her spear at him. She simply can't accept Takumi's decision and asks why he always prioritizes others over himself. Takumi tells her that he can't bear the thought of being the reason any of them get hurt, so no matter how much he cares about them, he can't allow them to stay with him any longer. Maria shouts that if Takumi truly cares about them, then he should want them to stand by his side and face any challenge together. But Takumi remains silent, unsure of how to respond. Overcome with emotion, Maria breaks down in tears and apologizes for lashing out at him. She admits that she doesn't know what to do with herself if she's not by his side. Sophia steps in to comfort Maria before turning to Takumi, telling him that while she understands he's only asking them to leave because he's worried about their safety, asking them to walk away after everything they've been through together is far too cruel. They all made a vow to serve him with everything they had, and they meant it when they swore their loyalty to him forever. At last, Takumi understands. He sincerely apologizes for trying to force his decision on them without taking their feelings into account. Then, he asks them one final time if they truly wish to stay by his side, despite the dangers ahead. Without hesitation, the girls assure him that they will stand with him, no matter what challenges come their way. With that settled, Takumi gets back to working on Titan's body, which now has an impressive shine. Titan is absolutely thrilled with his upgraded form. For its skeletal frame, Takumi used adamantite alloys, while mithril alloys were incorporated into its armor, along with every weapon he could possibly fit inside. But the best part is that Takumi built a massive body for the little Titan to inhabit. At last, he has fulfilled his lifelong dream of creating a real golem, and he couldn't be more satisfied. Meanwhile, from heaven, Nolan watches Takumi, possibly envious of his massive golem. However, she is abruptly interrupted by one of her subordinates, who brings troubling news. There are indications that Anat is beginning to manifest. The god worshipped by the Church of Divine Light didn't originally exist, but after years of devotion, their collective faith has brought Anat into being. Unfortunately, due to the corruption in their beliefs, Anat is now on the brink of transforming into an evil spirit. To make matters worse, since Sedona Macedonia was the nation responsible for summoning the heroes. There is a chance they might initiate a war once those heroes grow strong enough. Nolan already knew this, but she isn't able to interfere directly in the mortal world. That's the reason she placed Takumi in this world and bestowed so many blessings upon him. From this point forward, the fate of this world lies entirely on his shoulders. 1 year ago, in a small town near Bolton, a woman named Manny stood grieving by her husband's grave until a villager called her away. Not long after, while sitting inside a carriage, Manny overheard a conversation among the passengers about how there was no place left to go except this village. They spoke about how the village's economy had crumbled due to the unchecked actions of the nobles, who did whatever they pleased. As a result, the villagers found themselves facing a crisis they were unable to fix. When the situation became dire, the nobles abandoned the village, destroyed it, and fled to nearby countries. Because of this, the people now harbor deep resentment toward all nobles. Additionally, a woman in the discussion points out that Manny's husband labored until he became sick and was denied adequate care, effectively holding the nobles responsible for his passing. A year following the village's abandonment in Bolton, Lord Godwin is aware that the villagers were graciously taken in by Count Rockford. During this period, his two subordinates express their anger over the nobles' trivial behavior in this situation, while Bolton stresses that they cannot turn their backs on those who have been left homeless, especially now that Count Rockford has sent a letter requesting a new home for the refugees, numbering 1,000 in total. It's evident that a vast amount of land will be required. However, there is only one place where this can be accomplished. The challenge, though, is that this territory is notorious for being overrun with roaming monsters, and eliminating them will be no simple task. Yet, there is no alternative, leaving only one course of action: bringing in the one person capable of handling this situation. Meanwhile, Takumi feels it's the right moment for their party to take on a dungeon. Later, as they arrive at the dungeon's entrance, Takumi notes that it's been some time since he last felt the desire to venture into a place like this. So, out of the many dungeons available, they decide to tackle an A-rank dungeon, known as the second most challenging, the Beast King Forest. Even though it lies underground, it features mysterious, expansive skies and dense woods. Inside the dungeon, despite being outnumbered, the monsters are far stronger than those found outside. However, Maple proved to be an invaluable asset by detecting the presence of enemies, granting the group the upper hand with surprise attacks and allowing them to defend more effectively. Additionally, thanks to Titan, who absorbed the monsters' attacks as their tank, the party managed to defeat the bosses on each floor one after another and gather the treasures that dropped from them. After a long day of exploration, the team finally arrives at the last floor, filled with excitement for making it this far with barely any injuries. Takumi believes this is due to avoiding traps, but just as he says it, he steps on one, activating a massive iron ball that starts rolling behind them. Fortunately, they sprint fast enough to evade the danger. Now out of harm's way, they press on until they step into a dark room. Takumi gets the sense that they're being lured into a hostile place. Suddenly, an S-rank Earth dragon emerges from the darkness, making him regret not bringing the Great Titan to face this beast. As expected, the battle heavily favors the dragon, with the team struggling to keep up with its relentless assault, forcing them into a defensive stance. Then, seizing a brief moment of opportunity, Takumi commands Titan and Maple to grab hold of the monster's tail to stop it from moving. In that instant, Titan secures the tail, and Maple casts its web to immobilize the monster. Quickly, they coordinate their attacks to bring down the dragon, and Takumi instructs Titan to unleash the light of judgment to deliver the final blow. However, Takumi realizes it wasn't sufficient. Moments later, the dragon rises from the ashes and unleashes a torrent of fire at Titan, inflicting devastating damage. Amidst the chaos, Sophia identifies the enemy's weak spot on its flank, prompting Takumi to summon Camellia to charge at that precise point with a powerful headbutt. Following this, Takumi moves closer to the dragon, channels electricity into his sword, and hurls it directly into the dragon's mouth. The moment the dragon swallows the sword, it disintegrates into the air instantly, securing victory for their party. With this triumph, the final treasure and the entire dungeon now belong to them. Additionally, to the astonishment of everyone, Camellia undergoes an evolution, transforming into a dragon horse. Spotting a piece of the dragon on the ground, Takumi picks it up, convinced that he can craft something remarkable from this material. Shortly after their return from the dungeon, Takumi receives a summons from Godwin. During the meeting, Godwin brings up the undeveloped land lands in the southern part of his domain, an untamed region where no one resides because of the numerous dangerous monsters. In the past, the kingdom of Triaria attempted to invade this territory, but not only did they suffer defeat, their own kingdom began to decline as a result of that loss. Takumi notes that this region is also rich in unexplored adamantite and mithril, and upon hearing this, Godwin recognizes an opportunity to take an interest in these valuable resources. As a result, he suggests that Takumi establish a pioneer village in this area. After all, Godwin is aware of what happened in the village of Board, where Takumi swiftly built a sturdy wall around the territory, demonstrating that he is more than capable of accomplishing the same feat once again. Selvus explains that roughly 100 kilometers south of Bolton, there is a river and a spring, an ideal starting point for establishing a village. Not only does it provide a reliable water source, but it is also situated at a relatively safe distance from the monsters. Worried about her master's predicament, Sophia recalls that he is currently being pursued by Sidonia, while Godwin expresses his regret for making such a request during such a critical time. However, there's a compelling reason behind his urgency to see this village constructed quickly. A year ago, a settlement was abandoned after its development was abruptly halted due to the corruption of the nobles. As a result, the residents of that village lost their homes and were forced to become refugees, now relying on care provided by Bolton and Rockford. The goal is to build houses for them as swiftly as possible. Therefore, Takumi accepts the mission, as he cannot simply leave these people homeless, having been homeless himself a year ago. But the people of Board Village did everything to welcome the boy with open arms. Later, on his mission, Takumi starts using his earth magic to create roads and tall walls, followed by deep moats around the fortress. Next, they built internal roads, constructed aqueducts, and started eliminating the nearby monsters. After working for a while, Takumi requested Sophia to head back to Bolton and escort the new residents to their village. Upon her arrival and sharing the news, Godwin found it hard to believe that the village was already prepared to welcome its inhabitants after only 10 days of construction. Thus, the convoy carrying the refugees was dispatched, and along the way, people murmured among themselves, suspecting that they were being sent to the southern border, likely to that untamed land overrun with monsters, where they would surely be left to perish, no longer a burden to the nobles. According to what they had heard, the management of the settlement had been placed in the hands of a man sent from Bolton, no doubt another wealthy individual who viewed the poor as nothing more than expendable pawns. When they arrive at the fortress, the knights are astounded by the size of the wall they encountered at the new village, and even more so when they see perfectly erected houses and even a huge fort. As soon as Dorn enters the new village, Takumi shares that he was preparing the soil for agriculture, and that the wall should be good enough to repel monsters. Dorn questions the presence of a castle standing at the center of the village, to which Takumi explains that it was constructed for the village chief, as there are already enough houses for everyone. Additionally, he mentions the barracks built for the knights and how the sewage system is managed using septic tanks and magical devices. The officer, unable to believe that a mere boy accomplished all of this in just 10 days, grows suspicious and accuses him of relying on magic, an accusation that Takumi never denies. A couple of refugees, seeing their new city, wonder if they will truly be able to settle there. Meanwhile, Sophia approaches Manny and questions why she is alone in her new home. Manny explains that her husband passed away in their old village. Sophia responds by saying it must be difficult to manage a farm all by herself and asks if she might be interested in exploring other types of work. When Manny doesn't respond, Sophia assures her that she will speak to her master about the matter. Manny is surprised to hear that Sophia had a master, but Sophia explains that this man was responsible for building the village, and as everyone is very busy at the moment, he might need someone to cook for him. With that, Sophia goes to talk to Takumi and promises to find the young beast woman there later. Hours later, Takumi presents Manny with the opportunity to work for him, attending to his needs in exchange for a salary. At that moment, Manny recalls the discussions in the carriage about how nobles could no longer be trusted and how her husband had lost his life due to the greed of the wealthy. With these thoughts in mind, Manny chooses to decline the offer, worried that history might repeat itself and she could face another wave of despair after leaving her old village behind. In the end, she admits that she cannot bring herself to trust Takumi. Maria tries to assure her that Takumi is different from the other nobles, but he chooses to set the offer aside for now. After leaving the meeting, Manny concludes that she can no longer stay there after speaking to Takumi the way she did. Surely, she will now face some form of persecution, or perhaps something even worse. Maybe, deep down, her bluntness stemmed from an unconscious sense of justice. Maybe she was simply projecting the suffering she had endured at the hands of other nobles onto him. Or perhaps it was just the frustration of never having been able to change any of it. Amidst all this, Manny suddenly realizes that she has wandered outside the village, surrounded by a forest teeming with monsters, with no one nearby to protect her. At that moment, Maple rushes off to alert his master that a massive horde of monsters is invading the territory. Without hesitation, Takumi seeks out Dorn and commands that all bridges be raised and the residents secured. According to Takumi, no monster should be capable of breaching the wall, so his party will focus on dealing with the enemies outside. Meanwhile, Manny runs desperately to the inside of the wall, but has the misfortune of not arriving in time to see the bridge raised. Some residents inform Maria that they could not find Manny anywhere, but that she was seen leaving through the south bridge. Worried about Manny, they all get on Titan's back. Meanwhile, Manny is outside, facing two wolves and wondering what she was doing there, but soon concludes that she was born to die precisely in this place. However, just as she was about to be attacked by the wolves, Takumi quickly appears to save the girl and eliminate the creatures with his spear. Following that, Manny remarks that there are still many other monsters roaming free, but Takumi doesn't see this as much of a problem. At that moment, the rest of the group arrives with news that all the remaining creatures have been dealt with. Takumi then jokingly tells Manny that they truly are the best team. As she listens to his words, she suddenly notices that Takumi is injured. Without hesitation, she bandages his wound and apologizes for what she said to him earlier. However, Takumi simply reassures her, expressing his relief that Manny wasn't harmed after all. He refuses to let any of the villagers get injured, as his goal is for everyone to live a peaceful life. In that instant, Manny comes to understand that this young man is nothing like the nobles she has known before. He is compassionate and remarkable. Before long, she realizes that it may be too late to undo her past words, yet she openly admits her desire to serve Takumi, as he had once offered. Naturally, Takumi accepts her without hesitation, and the other girls, delighted, declare Manny officially hired, stepping forward to warmly welcome their new comrade. Back in Bolton, Dorn tells Godwin about the resounding success of Takumi in the newly established village. Proudly, Godwin wonders if this town could serve as a wedge. Meanwhile, in Sidonia, the king is handed a letter from the kingdom of Triaria. The letter reveals that a fortress town, complete with a massive castle, has unexpectedly been built on the undeveloped lands near the kingdom of Barcula. Additionally, it is reported that the knights spotted in the area were dispatched from Bolton, and there is a strong possibility that the alchemist is involved. This development could be interpreted as an indirect probe by the Empire of Sidonia. Elizabeth declares that they can no longer permit the kingdom of Barcula to maintain its dominance in this contest, and insists that Sidonia must become the sole ruler of the continent. The king, curious, asks his daughter what she means, and she reveals that the time has come to prepare for a counterattack. Back with Takumi, he inspects a road and contemplates utilizing it for trade until Manny shows up with the lunch boxes. Not long after, as they are having their meal, an immense mana wave suddenly erupts and sweeps across the continent with tremendous force, leaving everyone blinded and terrified. Maple mentions that she detected a highly unpleasant mana, while Sophia admits to having a bad feeling about it. At that instant, Takumi suddenly recalls that Nolan had tampered with time when summoning him to this world, placing him a year before the heroes were brought in. Now, exactly 1 year has passed since his arrival, which means the heroes have finally appeared. Amidst all this, Akira, Yamato, and Akane suddenly find themselves in the enigmatic hall of Sidonia, where they are welcomed by Elizabeth. 3 months had passed since the heroes were summoned, and by then, they had all achieved a rank. Nolan predicts that Sidonia will soon make its move. True to expectations, Elizabeth informs the heroes that she has an important announcement to share. She explains that the moment has finally arrived to reveal the world's new heroes, and as part of this, she plans to take them across the continent to showcase their abilities. While Akira and Yamato appear enthusiastic about the prospect of venturing out and being celebrated as heroes, Akane feels less eager about the idea. Despite her reservations, she goes along with the group, feigning excitement to ensure Elizabeth and the king remain unaware of her growing suspicions toward them. Meanwhile, on Takumi's side, the village he established has been officially named Wedgefort and is flourishing as merchants and craftsmen settle in to open their businesses. At the same time, in the forest just outside the village, Sophia is occupied with hunting down monsters. After slicing one in half, she hears Maple call out to her. Maple presents the monster she's captured, explaining that she's never seen anything like it before. Sophia, however, instantly identifies it as a bush lizard. She's beginning to feel concerned because the monsters in this region continue to grow increasingly stronger. She shares this with the others, prompting everyone to offer their help with the exterminations. However, Sophia assures them that won't be necessary since she is still capable of handling it on her own. Her only concern is that it seems odd for the monsters to have suddenly started growing stronger. She suspects that something is driving them out of their natural habitats, though she has no concrete evidence to support this. Still, she believes that the mana fluctuation they sensed 3 months ago could be connected. After all, if it was powerful enough to catch their attention, then it likely had some impact on the monsters in the region as well. Takumi recalls what Nolan mentioned about the heroes being summoned, making him aware that he needs to proceed with caution, though he remains uncertain about what he should expect. Later that evening, Captain Dorn informs Takumi that Barak, the guild master, is calling for his return, as he has a quest for him. Takumi agrees to head back soon, but before that, he asks Dorn if anything noteworthy happened in Bolton during his absence. Dorn replies that nothing has changed, though there is a rumor circulating that 3 heroes have emerged in the Empire of Sidonia. Upon hearing the news, everyone comes together to discuss what the summoning of heroes in Sidonia might mean. Since the others are unaware of the true nature behind the hero summoning, Maria speculates that Nolan must have summoned the heroes to Sidonia to rectify the kingdom's evil actions. However, Takumi knows better. Sidonia remains just as corrupt as they were when they attempted to kill him. All he can do now is hope that the heroes who were summoned turn out to be decent individuals. Unfortunately, that couldn't be further from the truth. Just as they are about to board their carriage, Yamato questions whether they are really bringing that filthy demi-human along. The girl attempts to apologize for offending him, but Yamato grows irritated that she would even dare to speak to him. Akane steps in to defend her, asserting that she is her personal attendant and that Yamato has no right to treat her that way. However, Akira interjects, stating that demi-humans are nothing more than slaves. Still, since Akane seems so attached to Lulu, he reluctantly allows her to ride in the carriage with them. As the heroes prepare to leave, Elizabeth and the king start praying to Anat, asking for her aid in helping the heroes overcome their enemies. Even if Anat wasn't real at first, she certainly exists now. When Takumi and the others arrive back in Bolton, they question Hans to see if he has any details about the heroes summoned in Sidonia. He informs them that the heroes consist of 2 boys and 1 girl, all with black hair. This leads Takumi to assume they must be Japanese, just like him. Hans also shares that the heroes are supposedly on a journey to visit all the churches in Barkula, though he explains that this is likely just a cover story. Their true objective, he suspects, is to destroy the churches of Nolan. Hans informs Takumi that Papek has specifically asked for his party to accompany him to the royal capital, and since the request comes directly from Papek, Takumi agrees to it. As everyone prepares for the escort mission, Manny approaches Takumi and asks if she can join them. However, Takumi isn't too keen on the idea, as escort missions can be dangerous, and Manny lacks any combat skills. There's a chance she could get hurt. Manny understands that, but being left alone in the mansion while everyone else is away on their mission would make her feel incredibly lonely. Maria and Sophia sympathize with her, and Manny earnestly asks Takumi to reconsider. She insists that she can use earth magic, meaning she wouldn't be completely useless in battle, and she pleads with him to let her come along. Eventually, Takumi gives in and agrees to let her join the escort mission, but only on the condition that she stays close to either Maria or Reva. Overjoyed that Takumi is allowing her to go, Manny is thrilled, though they will still need to get her registered as an adventurer later. Meanwhile, the heroes are on their way to Barkula, but Yamato and Akira are getting frustrated with all the jolts since this carriage lacks any suspension. Akira mentions that he heard someone in Barkula recently invented a carriage with suspension, so he's eager to get one. On the topic of things he wants, he also heard that Barkula is home to a large number of elves, so he jokingly asks Yamato if he'd like to bring a few back with them to have some fun. Yamato thinks that sounds like a great idea, but the captain informs them that Barkula has a law prohibiting slaves from being taken out of the country. However, Akira and Yamato couldn't care less about legal restrictions. As first-class adventurers who have already surpassed level 30, they believe there's no one on this continent who can rival their combat strength. Listening to them talk like that makes Akane feel sick, but that's precisely why she knows she has to take action. Right now, they are heading for the royal capital of Barkula, and Akane gets the feeling that this may be her only chance to fix things. A few days later, Takumi successfully completes his escort mission. When they return to the royal capital, the receptionist informs him that he, Sophia, and Maria are all being promoted to a rank. While Reva is being promoted to D rank, she requests their guild cards so she can finalize their promotions. But suddenly, a loud disturbance erupts at the back of the guild. The heroes have arrived, and they're already causing quite a spectacle. Akira orders everyone in the guild to move aside so he can make his way to the front. When a beast folk attempts to speak to him, Akira punches the man without any provocation. This alone would be troubling, but the situation escalates further when Akira and Yamato notice Takumi and his companions, whom they assume to be his slaves due to their beauty. Assuming Takumi is just another lowly adventurer, Akira demands that he immediately hand over the women. Takumi, of course, doesn't pay him any attention, and their arrogance is starting to irritate him. However, he still prefers to avoid unnecessary conflict, so he gives them a chance. He simply tells them to leave him alone. But Akira is far too full of himself to let that slide, so he draws his sword and lunges at Takumi with clear killing intent. Takumi effortlessly evades the attack and uses his alchemy to shatter Akira's sword. When Yamato tries to strike, Takumi easily flips him onto the ground as if he were a child. Akane is in awe that someone could defeat those two so effortlessly, while Akira is completely crushed by the loss, particularly since his sword was destroyed. Furious, he warns Takumi that he's going to regret this. In response, Takumi tells Akira that he's in no position to be making threats, because, for one, he just got his ass handed to him, and two, drawing your sword in the guild is a major offense, so he could get into a lot of trouble. Akira realizes Takumi is right, but he's still holding a grudge, so he swears he will get his revenge on Takumi eventually. After the two leave, Akane approaches Takumi to apologize for the actions of her fellow heroes, but Takumi reassures her that there's no need to apologize since she wasn't at fault. She introduces herself to Takumi, and her intuition tells her that he might be the person she's been searching for. However, before she can elaborate, Lulu arrives to inform Akane that it's time to go. Sensing that Akane had more to say, Takumi leans in and quietly tells her that he'll be waiting at the lakeside hotel tonight. Later that evening, Takumi tells the girls about his encounter with the heroes, but those two don't even deserve to be called heroes with the way they act. However, the girl that was with them seemed like a decent person, which is why Takumi told her to come meet him at this hotel. But now that he thinks about it, that might not have been such a good idea, because how exactly is Akane going to sneak away from her escorts without being noticed? It turns out Akane was indeed spotted, and now she's on the run from the guards alongside Lulu in an effort to reach Takumi. As the guards begin closing in on her, Sophia suddenly appears, swiftly knocking one of them out, while Maple drags the other away. Later, Sophia escorts Akane to the hotel, where she finally meets with Takumi. Since no one followed them, they don't have to worry about the guards for the time being. Wasting no time, Akane gets straight to the point. She looks at Takumi and asks if he is Japanese. Takumi tries to avoid the question since he can't risk the information being leaked to Sidonia, but Akane swears that she won't tell anyone. Takumi thinks Akane can be trusted, so he tells her that he's indeed Japanese, and the reason he is here is related to the heroes being summoned. All the girls are visibly confused, as this is the first time they've ever heard him mention anything like this. However, there's no reason to keep it a secret any longer, so he decides to reveal the truth. Before explaining, he asks everyone to swear that they'll keep this information confidential no matter what. Once they all agree, he begins recounting everything that happened before he was transported to this world. He expected them to think he was lying, but the girls actually don't find it hard to believe that Takumi is from the same world as the heroes and is acting on behalf of Nolan. From everything Takumi has told them, it's pretty clear that Sidonia is the bad guy here, and the fact that they have the heroes poses a real problem. Akane questions whether Takumi believes Sidonia is preparing to wage war against the other nations. While that is indeed a possibility, Takumi points out that Akira and Yamato are far from strong enough to lead a war on their own. Instead, it's far more plausible that Sidonia intends to use the heroes to rally the masses and provoke a war indirectly. Even if they don't succeed in starting a war, Takumi adds, the spread of the Church of Divine Light's influence through the presence of the heroes would still pose a significant problem. Akane apologizes to Takumi for getting him involved in this mess, but Takumi tells her it's not her fault because they all got summoned here against their will because of Sidonia. But speaking of being summoned, if Akira and Yamato also come from Japan, there's no way they could have been such lowlifes before ending up here. So Takumi questions Akane about why they behave that way. Akane isn't sure what triggered it, but she does recall that Akira and Yamato used to be good people before arriving. However, ever since they began their training in Sidonia, their personalities underwent a drastic change. Takumi finds that strange, so he asks Akane if they were ever given anything strange to eat, but Akane has no idea. She personally didn't trust Sidonia from the start, so she would always cast purification magic on her food before eating it. However, since Akira and Yamato weren't as skilled with light magic, there's a chance they might have been drugged and brainwashed at some point. With this in mind, Akane falls to her knees before Takumi, pleading with him to save her and Lulu, as she can't afford to return to Sidonia now. Takumi quickly tells her to get up, assuring her that she doesn't need to beg for his help after all. He wouldn't want to abandon a fellow Japanese girl. For now, he suggests they return to his mansion. After quick ride, everyone arrives back in Bolton, and to lift Akane's spirits, Maria prepares a warm serving of cream stew for her. Akane is completely stunned, as she hasn't had a meal like this in quite a while, and the sheer joy of it brings her to tears. Meanwhile, over in Wedgefort, a guard stationed on the wall notices something unusual happening in the forest. When he takes a closer look, he quickly realizes it's a monster stampede and immediately rushes off to sound the alarms. Meanwhile, back at Takumi's place, Akane and Lulu have already turned in for the night. While Takumi is hard at work in his workshop with Reva, he's got plans to speak with the king about Akane and Lulu eventually, but for now, they're safe and sound in his mansion. In the meantime, there's something on his mind that he wants to take care of, so he calls all the girls to come together. Once everyone gathers, Takumi announces that he's dissolving all their slave contracts right away. The girls are devastated, believing that he's trying to push them away once again, but he quickly reassures them that this isn't the case. With even greater dangers ahead, he knows they are willing to stay by his side no matter what. That's why he doesn't want them to be bound by slave contracts anymore. He wants them to stand as his equals, so they can truly consider themselves a family. After dissolving the slave contracts, Takumi returns to his workshop and completes the 2 legendary swords he had been crafting. However, before he even has the chance to test them, he receives an urgent notice from the guild regarding an emergency in Wedgefort. As he reads through the details, a sense of dread washes over him. Things are far worse than he could have imagined. Moments later, Takumi steps into the guild, only to be taken aback by the sight of all the members of Lion's Fang gathered and seemingly waiting for him. Curious, he inquires about the situation at Wedgefort, prompting Barak to explain that a massive horde of monsters is currently stampeding through the area. Due to the severity of the threat, only adventurers ranked B and above are being permitted to take part in the extermination effort. Unfortunately, most other parties are already occupied with various quests, leaving them with a limited number of adventurers to rely on. However, on the bright side, there is at least one other party available to join forces with them. At that moment, the members of the Crimson Rose Party enter, with their leader introducing herself as Merylda. Alongside her are Baralai, Mary, Paula, and Linda, and they mention that they have heard plenty about Takumi's party, making them eager to finally meet them in person. They are also familiar with Lion's Fang, though it seems Merylda doesn't exactly see eye to to eye with real, regardless. Now that everyone is present, the guild master instructs Takumi to lead both parties in the mission to protect Wedgefort from destruction, to which he immediately agrees. They set out without delay, but since Akane and Lulu are still in hiding, he decides to leave them behind at the mansion under Titan's protection. While traveling in the carriage, he hands Sophia a sword he recently forged, crafted from orichalcum. He wants her to wield it in the upcoming battle. He has named this sword Amaterasu, explaining that it is capable of dealing an immense amount of damage on its own. However, he also forged a second sword called Tsukayomi, which inflicts overwhelming mental damage upon striking an opponent. He is confident that both weapons will prove invaluable in battle. Before long, they approach Wedgefort, fully expecting to find a massive horde of monsters gathered outside the city walls. However, as long as there are no flying beasts, nothing should be able to breach the city's defenses. Unfortunately, when Takumi glances outside, he is met with a troubling sight. The sky is teeming with flying monsters. At this rate, the city is as good as lost unless they take action immediately. The group quickly springs into action, taking down as many monsters as possible. Once they manage to get inside the walls, they split up to clear the city streets as quickly as they can. After several hours of slaying monsters, Takumi and the others finally eliminate every single monster within the city walls. With the coast now clear, all the citizens emerge from hiding to express their gratitude. Takumi thanks the villagers for holding out long enough for him to arrive and instructs Reva and Manny to tend to the injured villagers. Meanwhile, Takumi decides to bring Sophia and Maria along to eliminate the remaining monsters. At the moment, it appears that the creatures are retreating, fleeing back into the woods, but their movements seem far too coordinated. This leads Takumi to suspect that a monster leader must be orchestrating their actions, though no one has ever encountered such a phenomenon before. He then reminds the group that when Sidonia summoned the heroes, it caused a massive mana fluctuation throughout the kingdom. Given this, it's possible that the surge in mana triggered the evolution of certain monsters. Word of the monster stampede quickly spreads to Sidonia. Upon discovering that the stampede is of such a scale that it could potentially devastate Barkula if it breaches Wedgefort, the king of Sidonia becomes determined to prevent this at all costs. He commands his troops to ready themselves for an assault on Wedgefort, aiming to strike when their defenses are weakest. However, Elizabeth proposes a more strategic alternative. She advises the king to use this moment to undermine Barkula's allies, like Samandor, and reveals that she has devised an ideal plan to achieve this by leveraging the heroes. At Wedgefort, Sophia is stationed on guard duty, keeping a close watch on the forest when Reva arrives with lunch for her. Sophia expresses her gratitude but notices that Reva seems troubled. Concerned, she inquires about what's wrong. Reva shares that Takumi has been distributing magic potions to the townspeople to aid in their healing. However, since they sold their surplus stock to Papik some time ago, Takumi must now be giving out potions from his own personal reserves. Sophia turns to ask Takumi about it, but he simply tells her that it's best for the injured to make use of the potions instead. Besides, as long as he ensures that he doesn't take any damage in the next battle, he won't have any need for healing potions himself. With that in mind, he instructs Reva, Manny, and Maple to stay behind and protect the civilians while he, Sophia, and Maria head back out to face the monsters. However, just as he is about to move, Maple suddenly warns him that the creatures in the forest have begun attacking once more. Wasting no time, everyone swiftly takes their positions as Takumi briefs them on the plan of attack. To begin, they unleash a barrage of magic attacks on the monsters, aiming to weaken them as much as possible. Following this, Takumi takes the lead, charging forward to eliminate as many monsters as he can. Takumi, Sophia, and Mary position themselves at the forefront of the battle, while Maria and Reva stay behind to offer support. Working together, they successfully defeat the initial wave of monsters, prompting the adventurers to advance and engage the remaining foes in close quarters combat. Up to this point, the situation has been under control, as they've successfully prevented the majority of the monsters from reaching the city. The handful that managed to breach the defenses and approach the wall were swiftly dealt with by Maple. The sole issue at the moment is Sophia, who is being somewhat overly aggressive and reckless with her attacks. However, things ultimately fall into place as the monsters start to retreat once more. However, this time, something strange occurs. Out of nowhere, a beast starts hunting down and devouring each monster one by one until only a single single one remains, and this last one is far stronger than the rest, leading Takumi to believe it must be their leader. The two-headed dragon unleashes a powerful blast aimed at Sophia, forcing her to leap out of the way. However, due to her proximity to the creature, she is struck and sent tumbling across the forest floor. Takumi quickly intervenes, rescuing her before she sustains serious injury. Yet, as soon as Sophia regains her footing, she deliberately places herself in danger again, attempting to draw the monster's focus. She succeeds in capturing its attention, but struggles to evade the dragon's relentless attacks. Eventually, one of the blasts connects, causing her to collapse. Just as the two-headed dragon moves in to deliver a final, crushing blow, Reva, Maria, and Maple strike it with a well-timed fireball, sending it crashing to the ground. This gives Takumi just enough time to arrive. As soon as Sophia is back on her feet, the two of them unleash every bit of magic they have on the monster. Then, Sophia tosses her sword to Takumi so he can deliver the final blow. Takumi uses Amaterasu to sever the creature's wing before pouring all the mana he can muster into Tsukuyomi, slicing the monster clean in two. With the two-headed dragon finally defeated, he rushes over to Sophia and begins healing her. She tries to reassure him that she's fine and that he doesn't need to worry, but Takumi is already deeply concerned. He demands to know why she would do something so reckless. Sophia realizes she acted carelessly, but all she wanted was to protect Takumi no matter what. Takumi shouts that the way she was acting could have gotten her killed, but Sophia doesn't see much value in her own life to begin with, so she wouldn't hesitate to die if it meant keeping him safe. However, Takumi has already made it clear before he doesn't want her throwing her life away for his sake. After finishing Sophia's healing, Takumi turns to the others and asks if any more monsters are headed for the village. They inform him that once the leader was taken down, most of the remaining monsters turned tail and fled, meaning Wedgefort should be safe for now. Takumi feels relieved at the news, but with all the stress from the battles finally catching up to him, he suddenly loses consciousness and passes out. Thankfully, after a few hours of rest, Takumi regains consciousness, and everyone is overjoyed to see him unharmed. He and the group dedicate the following days to repairing the sections of Wedgefort that were damaged during the battle. Once the repairs are complete, they set out on their journey back to Barcula. However, while Wedgefort emerged from the ordeal relatively unscathed, the same cannot be said for the people of Samandor, who suffered a devastating massacre at the hands of Akira and Yamato. In Barcula, Takumi organizes a barbecue to celebrate their triumph over the monsters. However, Reva observes that Sophia is sitting alone in the shadows, seemingly distant. Akane also picks up on Sophia's unusual behavior and questions Maria about it, but Maria is just as clueless. The only thing Maria knows is that Sophia has been acting this way ever since their return from Wedgefort. Convinced that Takumi must have some insight into the matter, Maria insists that he step in and address the situation. Takumi approaches Sophia and apologizes for raising his voice at her during the battle. However, Sophia knows that she was the one at fault for recklessly endangering her own life. Takumi understands that her only intention was to protect him, but he reminds her that he would never want her to sacrifice herself for his sake. He has said before that he wants to be partners with everyone, which means they all need to treat each other as equals. So from now on, he wants Sophia to value her own life just as much as she values his, because the last thing he ever wants is to stand by and watch her die. A couple days later, he takes Akane and Lulu to meet with Lord Goodwin to formally request permission to shelter them in his mansion. Since this is a significant international matter, Goodwin grants his approval, allowing Akane and Lulu to stay with Takumi permanently. However, he also shares troubling news a massacre recently took place in the Samandor Kingdom. Based on the information he gathered, the ones responsible were none other than the other two heroes. Hearing this, Akane is overcome with guilt, wondering if she could have prevented so many deaths had she not chosen to run away. But Takumi reassures her that none of it is her fault. Despite this, Akane is aware that she will eventually have to confront those two, and she vows that the next time, she won't retreat. Takumi, meanwhile, is deeply disturbed because Sidonia has brainwashed these teenagers for their own selfish goals. Determined to seek answers, answers. He pays a visit to Nolan to ask her a few questions. Nolan is delighted to see him again, as it has been quite some time since his last visit. He inquires if there was a specific reason she sent him a year into the past, explaining that ever since then, his life has become increasingly intertwined with Sidonia and the other heroes. But all Nolan can say to him is that she is entrusting the future to his hands. Takumi has already made up his mind. He will do whatever is necessary to safeguard those he holds dearest. He cherishes the new life he has been granted and finds joy in his role as an alchemist, as it allows him to create anything he wants to. And if the only way to defend this newfound life is to confront Sidonia and put an end to their sinister schemes, then that is exactly what he must do. Before Nolan sends him back to Earth, Takumi has one last thing to take care of this time. He hasn't forgotten to bring her some offerings, and that, at least, leaves her satisfied. This was the end. Subscribe to not miss more recaps and watch the next video on screen.